The child was dying in her arms, and Wren had nowhere left to run. Under a merciless Wyoming sun that turned the air to fire, she cradled her youngest daughter against the broken wheel of a stagecoach, while dust devils spun across the cracked earth like ghosts. The driver lay unconscious in the dirt. Her older daughter sat motionless, eyes glazed with fear and heat. Eliza had lied to get here, lied in a letter to a widowed rancher who thought he was getting a single woman, not a desperate mother with 2 children and a brother-in-law who would burn the world to drag them back. Now she stood at the edge of a stranger's land with her daughter's pulse growing fainter, and one terrible choice: knock on Cole Thatcher's door and pray he wouldn't turn them away, or watch everything she loved turn to dust beneath this unforgiving sky. If you want to see how far this story of survival, secrets, and second chances reaches, drop a comment with your city below and hit that like button. Now let me take you back to where it all began. The heat had teeth. That was Eliza's first thought when she stepped off the stagecoach onto Wyoming soil 3 days earlier, her daughters pressed close on either side. The sun didn't just warm, it consumed. It pulled moisture from skin, turned breath to sand, made every shadow precious as water. She'd known the frontier would be harsh, but she hadn't understood that harshness could be a physical weight pressing down from a cloudless sky. "Mama, I'm thirsty." Claire's voice was small, threads of sound barely holding together. "I know, baby. Soon." Eliza smoothed her younger daughter's sweat-dampened hair, the copper curls darkened to rust. 8 years old and already carrying more fear than any child should know. Just a little farther. Maisie, 12 and sharp as broken glass, said nothing. She stood with her arms crossed, surveying the endless expanse of brown grass and distant mountains with the suspicious eyes of someone who'd learned that new places were just old dangers in different clothes. The driver, a weathered man named Hutchins, had promised them 2 days to Cole Thatcher's ranch. The trail between Cheyenne and the remote valley wasn't much traveled, he'd explained, but it was passable if you knew the way and had enough water. They'd had enough water. Past tense. The first canteen had leaked, soaking through Eliza's trunk and ruining half her spare clothes before anyone noticed. The second had lasted until yesterday afternoon, when Hutchins misjudged a rocky stretch, and the wagon pitched sideways, sending the canteen flying into brush so thick they'd spent an hour searching before giving up. The third was supposed to carry them through. It hadn't. Now, with the sun at its zenith and the temperature climbing past anything Eliza had ever endured, Hutchins pulled the horses to a stop and climbed down from his seat. His movements were slower than they'd been that morning, uncertain. "Something wrong?" Eliza's throat was so dry the words scraped. "Trail's not right." Hutchins squinted at the horizon, then back the way they'd come. "Should have seen the ridge by now. That rock formation with the split top. Looks like a church steeple. It's the marker, but I don't see it." Cold fear cut through the heat. "Are we lost?" "Not lost. Just turned around some." But his eyes betrayed him. "I'll get us straightened out. Just need to think a minute." Maisie made a sound that might have been a laugh if it had held any humor. "We're lost." "Maisie," Eliza's voice carried warning. "We are, Mama. Look at him. He doesn't know where we are." Maisie turned to face her mother, and in her eyes was an accusation that cut deeper than words. "You did this. You brought us here. This is your fault." She wasn't wrong. Eliza had made the choice 6 weeks ago, sitting in a boarding house in St. Louis, with $23 to her name and Gideon Wren's shadow growing longer every day. Her late husband's brother had started with sympathy after Thomas died, offering help, bringing food, playing the concerned family member. But sympathy had curdled into something darker. The way he looked at Maisie, the way his hand lingered too long on Eliza's shoulder. The night he'd stood outside their door for 2 hours, just waiting, just breathing on the other side of thin wood. The law wouldn't help. Gideon was respectable, a businessman with friends in city offices. She was a widow with 2 daughters and no proof of anything except her own mounting fear. So when she'd seen the advertisement in the Western Star, "Widowed rancher seeks wife. Must be hard-working, honest, and ready for frontier life. Children welcome." She'd written the letter before she could talk herself out of it. She just hadn't mentioned that children welcome would mean 2, or that she was running from something she couldn't explain without sounding hysterical, or that Cole Thatcher's remote Wyoming ranch represented her last, desperate hope for a place Gideon couldn't reach. The deception had seemed justified then, necessary even. Now, watching Hutchins study the empty horizon with increasing desperation while her daughters wilted in the heat, it felt like one more mistake in a long chain of them. "All right," Hutchins cleared his throat. "I'm going to climb up that rise, see if I can spot the ridge from higher ground. You ladies stay with the wagon, keep in the shade." What shade? The sun was directly overhead, and the wagon's shadow had shrunk to a thin line. But Eliza nodded, because what else could she do? They watched Hutchins trudge toward a low hill, perhaps a quarter-mile distant. Clara leaned against Eliza's side, her breathing shallow. Maisie stood apart, arms still crossed, face set in that expression of bitter endurance she'd perfected over the past year. "This was stupid," Maisie said quietly. "Maisie, it was, Mama, coming all the way out here to marry some stranger. We should have stayed in St. Louis. We could have managed." "No." The word came out harder than Eliza intended. "We couldn't, you know that." "Because of Uncle Gideon." Maisie's voice dripped scorn. "You're so scared of him, but he never actually did anything. He was just waiting." Eliza cut her off. "He was waiting, Maisie. Waiting for the right moment, the right excuse. Men like that are patient, and when they finally move, it's too late to run." Maisie's jaw worked. She wanted to argue. Eliza could see it, but she was also old enough to remember the night Gideon had stood outside their door, old enough to have felt the same cold fear that had driven Eliza to this desperate gamble. "I'm hot," Clara whispered. "I know, sweetheart. My head hurts." Eliza pressed her lips to Clara's forehead and felt heat that had nothing to do with the sun. "Fever. Already. Just rest. As soon as Mr. Hutchins finds the way, we'll get you water." But Hutchins didn't come back. They waited in silence, broken only by the buzz of insects and the occasional stamp of the horses. The sun crawled across the sky with agonizing slowness. Clara's breathing grew more labored. Maisie finally sat down, her defiance crumbling into exhaustion. "Mama?" Clara's voice was barely audible. "Are we going to die?" "No." Eliza pulled her closer. "No, baby, we're not." But she'd made promises before. Some of them she'd been able to keep. When another 30 minutes had passed with no sign of Hutchins, Eliza made herself stand. Every muscle protested. Her lips had cracked, her tongue felt swollen, and dark spots danced at the edges of her vision. "I'm going to look for him." Mama, no." Maisie was on her feet instantly. "You can't leave us. I'll be gone 5 minutes. Stay in the wagon. If I'm not back soon, or if you see anyone at all, you call out. Understand?" Maisie's face had gone white beneath the sunburn. "Don't leave us." 5 minutes. Eliza forced strength into her voice she didn't feel. "I promise." She walked toward the rise where Hutchins had gone, her skirts dragging through dust that puffed up with each step. The hill was farther than it looked. Distance played tricks in this empty land. By the time she reached the top, her heart was pounding, and sweat ran in rivulets down her spine. From the higher vantage, she could see for miles. Brown grass, scattered sage, distant mountains shimmering in heat haze, and there, perhaps 300 yards to the north, a crumpled shape in the dirt. "No," the word escaped as a whisper. "No, no, no." She half ran, half stumbled down the slope and across the uneven ground. Hutchins lay on his side, one arm outflung, hat several feet away. His face was gray beneath the sunburn, lips cracked and bleeding. "Mr. Hutchins?" She dropped to her knees beside him. "Can you hear me?" His eyelids flickered. "Lost." The word was barely formed. "Sorry. So sorry. Don't talk. Save your strength." But even as she said it, Eliza knew. Heat exhaustion, possibly heat stroke, without water, without shade, without help. "Girls," Hutchins managed. "Get them. Safe." "I will, I promise. Just rest." But Hutchins was past resting. His eyes rolled back and his breathing turned shallow and rapid. Eliza stayed beside him, one hand on his shoulder, watching a stranger die because she'd hired him to take her somewhere he didn't really know how to find. When his breathing finally stopped, she sat back on her heels and looked at the empty sky. They were lost in the Wyoming territory with no water, no guide, and no idea which direction to go. Clara was already sick. Maisie was strong but still a child. And Eliza had brought them here, dragged them into this wasteland because she'd been too frightened to stay and too desperate to think clearly. "You're going to lose them," a voice whispered in her mind. "You're going to watch them die just like Hutchins, and it'll be your fault." "No." She stood, ignoring the way her legs trembled. No. She hadn't survived Thomas's death, Gideon's predation, and 6 weeks of terror to die in the dirt of the Wyoming Territory. She'd gotten them this far. She would get them the rest of the way. She just had to figure out how. The walk back to the wagon took longer. Her vision kept going gray at the edges, and twice she stumbled and barely caught herself. But she made it. When she came over the rise and saw Maisie standing beside the wagon, shading Clara with her own body, something fierce and protective surged through her exhaustion. "Is he coming?" Maisie called. Eliza shook her head as she approached. "He's gone." Maisie understood immediately. Her face went very still. "What do we do?" "We find the ranch ourselves." Eliza tried to make it sound certain. "How?" "We don't know where it is. Thatcher's place is in the valley near Eagle Ridge. That's what the letter said. If we head west toward the mountains, we'll find it." "West is a big direction, Mama. It's the direction we have." Eliza climbed into the wagon beside Clara, who was curled on her side, barely conscious. "Can you drive?" Maisie blinked. "What?" "Can you drive the wagon? I need to stay with Clara. You're strong enough to handle the reins." "Mama, I've never—" "You've watched Hutchins for 2 days. The horses know to follow the trail. You just have to keep them moving." Eliza met her daughter's eyes. "I know you can do this." For a moment, Maisie looked like the child she was, frightened, overwhelmed, wanting someone else to take charge. Then her jaw set, and she became something harder. "All right." They abandoned Hutchins where he'd fallen. Eliza hated it, hated leaving him for the coyotes and the sun, but there was no alternative. Maisie climbed onto the driver's seat, took up the reins with shaking hands, and clicked her tongue the way she'd heard Hutchins do. The horses, bless them, started moving. They traveled west, following the sun toward the mountains. Eliza sat in the back of the wagon with Clara's head in her lap, using her own body to provide what shade she could. Clara's fever was climbing. She mumbled incoherent words, sometimes calling for her father, sometimes crying about being thirsty. "I know, baby," Eliza whispered over and over. "I know." The afternoon stretched into evening. The sun, finally, began to sink toward the horizon. The temperature dropped from unbearable to merely brutal. Maisie kept the horses moving with a grim determination that broke Eliza's heart. "Mama?" Maisie's voice drifted back. "I see something." Eliza forced herself to look up. There, in the distance, was a dark line that might have been trees. Trees meant water. Water meant a creek or river. Creeks meant settlement. "Keep going." The dark line resolved into cottonwoods as they drew closer. The wagon rattled down a gentle slope, and suddenly they were in a valley that had actual green grass, actual shade, actual evidence that water existed somewhere in this godforsaken territory. And there, beyond the cottonwoods, was a house. It wasn't much. A rough cabin with a barn and a few outbuildings, but it was human habitation, and that was enough. Eliza's eyes stung with tears she couldn't afford to shed. "Stop here," she called to Maisie. The wagon creaked to a halt. Eliza climbed down on shaking legs, then reached back for Clara. Her youngest daughter was a limp weight in her arms, fever-hot and barely responsive. "Stay with the wagon," Eliza told Maisie. "Mama, stay, please." She walked toward the house, each step an act of will. The sun was setting now, painting everything gold and red. She made it to the porch, 4 rough-hewn steps and a door with peeling paint, and knocked. No answer. She knocked again, harder. "Please, I need help. My daughter is sick." Still nothing. Desperation clawed at her throat. "My name is Eliza Wren. I'm looking for Cole Thatcher. Please, if anyone is there—" The door opened. The man who stood there was tall and lean, with dark hair, darker eyes, and a face that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. He was younger than she'd expected from his letter, maybe 35 and harder. Everything about him was hard. Hard jaw, hard muscles, hard expression. He looked at her with no warmth whatsoever. I'm Thatcher. I... Eliza's voice broke. She tried again. I answered your advertisement. I'm Eliza. I wrote you about coming to... His eyes cut past her to the wagon, where Maisie sat frozen on the driver's seat. Then down to Clara, limp and fever-flushed in Eliza's arms. The silence that followed was terrible. You said you were alone. His voice was flat, each word falling like a stone. Your letter said you had no children. I lied. There was no point in denying it. I'm sorry, I lied. But please... She lifted Clara slightly, showing him the child's flushed face, the cracked lips, the shallow breathing. Please, she's sick. She needs water. She needs help. I know I deceived you, and you have every right to turn us away, but she's 8 years old and she's dying, and I am begging you. Bring her inside. The words were curt, but he stepped back from the door. Eliza didn't wait for him to change his mind. She carried Clara into a room that was spare and clean and blessedly cool after the wagon. There was a table, chairs, a stone fireplace, shelves with supplies. Thatcher gestured to a door in the back. Bedroom. Put her on the bed. The bedroom was as plain as the rest of the house. A wide bed with rough blankets, a washstand, a window with simple curtains. Eliza laid Clara down and immediately started unlacing her daughter's boots. Thatcher appeared with a bucket and dipper. Water, not too much at first or she'll be sick. Thank you. Eliza's hand shook as she lifted Clara's head and brought the dipper to her lips. Drink, sweetheart, just a little. Clara's eyes opened slightly, focused on nothing, then closed again. But her lips moved and she swallowed. Once. Twice. That's good. That's my girl. Thatcher stood in the doorway watching with that same hard expression. Your driver? Dead. Heat took him this afternoon. Something flickered in his eyes. Not sympathy exactly, but acknowledgement. The other girl? Maisie. She's 12. She's in the wagon. I'll see to the horses. He turned to leave, then paused. There's food if you're hungry. Help yourself. Mr. Thatcher. Later. And he was gone. Eliza sat beside Clara, giving her water in small sips, bathing her face and arms with a damp cloth. Slowly, so slowly, the fever began to break. Clara's breathing eased. The terrible gray tinge faded from her skin. She was going to live. The relief was so overwhelming that Eliza had to press her face into the blanket to muffle her sobs. She'd been so certain, so terribly certain, that she was going to watch another person she loved die. But Clara was breathing. Clara was here. Clara was going to be all right. When she finally had herself under control, she stood and went to the main room. Through the window, she could see Thatcher unhitching the horses with Maisie standing nearby, watching him with the same suspicious wariness she showed everyone. Eliza found bread, cheese, and dried meat laid out on the table. Her stomach cramped at the sight, but she forced herself to eat slowly. Food, water, shelter. The basic requirements of survival, all provided by a man she'd lied to. A man who looked at her with anger and something darker. Betrayal, maybe. She'd deal with that. She had to. But right now, all that mattered was that her daughters were safe. The door opened and Maisie came in, Thatcher behind her. Maisie's eyes found Eliza immediately. Clara? She's sleeping. The fever broke. She's going to be fine. Maisie's shoulders sagged with relief so profound she looked like she might collapse. Thatcher gestured to the table. Eat, then we talk. Maisie ate like someone who'd forgotten what food was, shoving bread and cheese into her mouth with desperate efficiency. Thatcher leaned against the wall, arms crossed, waiting. When Maisie finally slowed down, he spoke. Tell me the truth. All of it. So Eliza did. She told him about Thomas dying 2 years ago, leaving her with nothing but debts and 2 daughters. About Gideon stepping in with help that slowly became control. About the way he looked at Maisie, the way he talked about family obligation and how the girls needed a man's guidance. About the night he'd stood outside their door, breathing and waiting, while she'd held a kitchen knife and prayed he wouldn't force the lock. She told him about the advertisement, about the lie, about the choice between staying in St. Louis, where Gideon could reach them, or running to a place so remote he'd never find them. She told him everything except how frightened she'd been. That she kept locked inside. When she finished, Thatcher was silent for a long moment. Then, "You should have told me the truth in your letter. You would have said no." "You're damn right I would have." His voice was hard. "I wanted a wife, not a woman with 2 children and a dangerous man hunting her. I know. I'm sorry. But I didn't have a choice. Everyone has choices." "No." Eliza met his eyes. "Some people have choices. I had this or Gideon. That's not choosing, that's surviving." Maisie watched them both, tension written in every line of her body, ready to run, ready to fight, ready for this stranger to throw them out into the dark. But Thatcher just looked at Eliza for a long, measuring moment. Then he pushed off the wall. "You can stay tonight. The child needs rest. Tomorrow, we'll figure out what comes next." It wasn't acceptance. It wasn't even kindness. But it was shelter for one more night, and that was more than Eliza had any right to expect. "Thank you." He nodded once, then headed for the door. "I'll sleep in the barn. You take the bedroom with the girls. Door has a lock if you want it." He was gone before Eliza could respond. Maisie waited until his footsteps faded, then whispered, "He's going to send us away." "Maybe." "What do we do then?" Eliza looked at her daughter, this fierce, frightened girl who'd driven a wagon across the wilderness to save her sister. "We survive, Maisie. Same as always. We survive." But even as she said it, Eliza felt the weight of exhaustion and fear pressing down. They'd made it here. They'd found Cole Thatcher's ranch. Clara was alive. But the hardest part was just beginning. That night, Eliza lay in Cole Thatcher's bed with her daughters on either side of her, listening to them breathe. Clara slept deeply, her fever gone, her body finally released from crisis. Maisie was awake. Eliza could tell by the quality of her stillness, but pretending to sleep. Through the window, moonlight painted the valley silver. Somewhere out there, Thatcher was in his barn, probably lying awake and cursing the lying widow who'd invaded his carefully ordered solitude. Eliza couldn't blame him, but she also couldn't regret it. Clara was alive. They had food, water, shelter. For tonight, that was enough. Tomorrow she'd face Thatcher's anger and whatever decision he made about their future. Tomorrow she'd have to be strong again, persuasive again, whatever it took to convince him to let them stay. But tonight, she let herself be weak. She let herself lie in a stranger's bed and feel the impossible relief of still having both her daughters breathing beside her. The Wyoming night was cold after the brutal heat of day. Eliza pulled the blanket up over all 3 of them and closed her eyes. She'd lied to get here. She'd deceived a man who'd been looking for honesty. She'd brought danger to his doorstep and children he'd never agreed to. But she'd also kept her daughters alive. In the calculus of motherhood, that balanced the scales. Outside, a coyote called to the moon, a long, wavering cry that sounded like all the loneliness in the world given voice. Eliza listened until it faded into silence, then let sleep take her. Whatever tomorrow brought, she'd face it. She'd survived this far. She could survive one more day, and then another, and another. For as long as it took to build something here that Gideon Wren could never touch. The last thing she thought before sleep claimed her was a prayer disguised as determination. Please let him give us a chance. Just one chance. That's all we need. Then darkness and the deep sleep of the utterly exhausted. In the barn, Cole Thatcher lay on a pile of hay with his saddle for a pillow and stared at the rafters. He'd been alone for 3 years. 3 years of silence and work and the careful construction of a life that required nothing from anyone. Now there were children in his house, a woman in his bed, voices where there'd been none. He should send them away at first light. He knew that. They'd lied, brought complications he didn't want, threatened the peace he'd fought so hard to achieve. But the image of that child, Clara, the woman had called her, burning with fever in her mother's arms, kept rising in his mind. 8 years old, the same age his daughter would have been. If she'd lived. Thatcher closed his eyes and tried not to remember. But memory didn't care what he wanted. It came anyway, brutal and complete. Sarah's face. The baby's cry cutting off too soon. The winter that took them both and left him with nothing but a ranch too big for one man and a silence that never ended. He'd thought he wanted it that way. Silence. Solitude. No more chances to lose what he loved. But now there were children in his house. and one of them had almost died, and he'd carried her inside because what else could a man do when a child was dying in front of him? Tomorrow. He'd deal with it tomorrow. Tonight he'd let them stay because it was the right thing to do, but tomorrow they'd have to go. Because Cole Thatcher had learned the hardest way possible that loving anything was just setting yourself up for loss, and he'd be damned if he'd go through that again. Even if the woman with the desperate eyes and the fierce voice reminded him, just a little, of what it felt like to have something worth protecting. He turned onto his side away from the house and forced his mind to empty. Tomorrow. Everything could wait until tomorrow. Dawn came cold and gray, the sun a pale suggestion behind a veil of clouds that promised rain but wouldn't deliver. Eliza woke to the sound of an axe biting wood, steady, rhythmic, relentless. She extracted herself carefully from between her daughters and went to the window. Cole Thatcher was splitting logs in the yard, his movements efficient and controlled. He'd already been at it long enough to build a considerable pile. Working off anger, she thought, or working up the resolve to tell them to leave. Clara stirred behind her. "Mama?" "I'm here, baby." Eliza returned to the bed, pressed her hand to Clara's forehead. "Cool. No fever. How do you feel?" "Thirsty. And my head still hurts a little." "That's the sun from yesterday. It'll pass." Eliza helped her sit up, brought her water from the bucket Thatcher had left. "Drink slow." Maisie was awake too, watching them both with eyes that hadn't fully closed all night. "What's he doing?" "Chopping wood." "Is he mad?" "Probably." Eliza kept her voice steady. "Get dressed. We need to talk to him before he decides for us." They dressed quickly in yesterday's dusty, sweat-stained clothes. Eliza did what she could with her hair, pinning it back with hands that wanted to shake. Then she sent the girls to wash at the pump outside while she straightened the bed and tried to make the room look less invaded. When she emerged, Thatcher had stopped chopping. He stood with the axe resting against the chopping block, watching Maisie show Clara how to work the pump handle. His expression was unreadable. Eliza walked over, stopped a careful distance away. "Good morning." "Morning." He didn't look at her. "How's the child?" "Better. The fever's gone. She's weak, but she'll recover." "Good." He pulled the axe free, set it aside with deliberate care. "We need to talk." "I know." He finally met her eyes. In daylight, she could see details she'd missed last night. The lines around his mouth that spoke of grief held too long, the calluses on his hands, the way he held himself like a man who'd learned not to lean on anything or anyone. "I want you gone by noon," he said quietly. "I'll give you supplies, food, water, enough to get you to the nearest town. You can take the wagon, but I can't have you here." It was what she'd expected, but hearing it still felt like a fist to the stomach. "Mr. Thatcher, you lied to me." His voice stayed level, but something hard edged each word. "You looked me in the eye through that letter and told me you were alone. You knew I wouldn't take a woman with children. You knew that and you lied anyway." "Yes." No point denying it. "I did." "Then you understand why I can't trust you." "I understand why you're angry. But, Mr. Thatcher, please, where do you expect us to go? The nearest town is 3 days back the way we came, and we barely made it here. Clara almost died. If we go back out there, then you should have thought of that before you came." He looked past her to where the girls stood by the pump, Clara leaning against her sister. "I'm sorry, I am, but I can't do this." "Can't or won't?" His jaw tightened. "Both." "Because of what I did, or because they're children?" The question hit something. She saw it in the way his shoulders went rigid, the way his hands flexed once before going still. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. "I lost my wife and daughter 3 years ago. I came out here to get away from all of it. I'm not looking to replace them. I'm not looking for family. I put that advertisement in the paper because this ranch needs 2 people to run it properly, and I thought a wife would be simpler than hiring help. That's all it was supposed to be. Simple. Practical." "Life is never simple, Mr. Thatcher." "It was until you showed up." Eliza drew a slow breath. She could beg. She could throw herself on his mercy, paint pictures of what would happen to them if he sent them away. But she'd learned that men who'd closed themselves off to feeling didn't respond to emotional appeals. They responded to reason. "You're right," she said. "I lied. I deceived you. I brought complications you didn't want. but I'm also exactly what your advertisement asked for. I'm hardworking. I'm honest about everything except what I had to lie about to survive. And I'm ready for frontier life because I don't have a choice. You need help running this ranch. I can give you that. My daughters can help too. Maisie's strong and smart. Clara's young, but she's learning. We can earn our keep. That's not the point. Then what is? Because if you're sending us away on principle, that's one thing. But if you're doing it because you're scared, I'm not scared. The words came out sharp. You're terrified. Eliza held his gaze. You lost people you loved, so you ran to the middle of nowhere and convinced yourself that being alone was safer. But it's not safer, Mr. Thatcher. It's just lonelier. And turning away people who need help because you're afraid of being hurt again, that's not protection. That's just giving grief more power than it deserves. For a long moment, he stared at her. Then quietly, You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? My husband died 2 years ago. I know exactly what it feels like to lose everything and wonder if you'll ever feel whole again. The difference is, I didn't have the luxury of running away. I had 2 children who needed me, and when hiding wasn't safe anymore, I had to run towards something instead of away from it. So yes, I lied to you. Yes, I brought my daughters without asking, but I did it because the alternative was staying where a dangerous man could reach them, and I will do anything, lie, deceive, beg, to keep them safe. Anything. Thatcher looked away first. His hands curled into fists, released. You can't stay. For how long? A week? A month? Just until you can't stay. He turned and walked toward the barn, his stride long and final. Eliza stood frozen, feeling the careful composure she'd maintained start to crack. She'd played her cards. She'd been honest, logical, even vulnerable, and it hadn't been enough. Mama? Clara's small voice carried across the yard. What did he say? Eliza forced herself to turn, forced a smile that felt like glass cutting her face. Get your things, girls. We're leaving. Maisie's expression went flat. I told you this was stupid. Not now, Maisie. When then? When we're dying in the wagon again? When Clara gets so sick there's no one to... I said not now. Eliza's voice cracked like a whip. Go get your things, both of you. They went, Maisie's shoulders stiff with anger, Clara's eyes already filling with tears. Eliza walked to the wagon, started checking the rigging with hands that shook. Thatcher had been true to his word. There were supplies loaded in the back. Food, water, blankets. Enough to get them somewhere. She just didn't know where that somewhere was. Behind her, the barn door opened. Thatcher emerged carrying a small crate, which he loaded into the wagon without looking at her. Extra jerky, he said, and matches. You'll want to camp before dark. There's a spot about 10 miles south with good cover in a creek. Thank you. He nodded once, started to turn away. Mr. Thatcher. Eliza's voice stopped him. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Not for lying, I'd do that again if I had to. But for making you face things you wanted to forget. That wasn't fair to you. He stood very still. Life's not fair, Mrs. Wren. If it was, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Then he was gone, back into the barn like a man retreating to a fortress. Eliza finished with the wagon, then went to collect her daughters. They'd gathered their meager belongings in silence. Clara's eyes were red but dry. She'd learned young not to waste tears. Maisie's face was a mask. Ready? Eliza asked. Neither girl answered. They climbed into the wagon, settled into the back with the supplies. Eliza took the driver's seat, picked up the reins, and allowed herself one last look at the ranch. It wasn't much. A rough cabin, a functional barn, fenced pastures with a few head of cattle visible in the distance. But it had water, shelter, space. It could have been safety. She clicked her tongue, and the horses started forward. They'd made it perhaps 100 yards when Clara spoke. Mama, I don't feel good. Eliza's heart clenched. What's wrong? Dizzy. And my stomach. Clara leaned over the side of the wagon and vomited, thin and bile-streaked. Whoa. Eliza pulled the horses to a stop, climbed back to Clara. Her daughter's face was pale, her skin clammy. Not fever this time, but dehydration and exhaustion. The body shutting down again after being pushed too far. She needs rest, Maisie said. Real rest. Not bouncing around in a wagon. Eliza knew that. But what choice did they have? Turn around and beg Thatcher to let a sick child stay one more day? He'd made his decision clear. Except when she looked back at the ranch, Thatcher was standing in the yard, watching them. Even at this distance, she could see the tension in his posture. Clara vomited again, her small body convulsing with the effort. "Please," Eliza whispered to no one. "Please." Thatcher started walking toward them. He covered the distance in long strides, his face unreadable. When he reached the wagon, he looked at Clara, then at Eliza. "She's sick again." "The journey yesterday was too much," Eliza said. "Her body's still recovering. She just needs 1 week." The words were flat, final. "You can stay 1 week. That'll give the child time to get her strength back. After that, you leave, understand?" Relief flooded through Eliza so powerfully she had to grip the wagon rail to stay upright. "Yes, thank you. I'm not doing this for you." Thatcher's eyes were hard. "I'm doing it because I won't have a child's death on my conscience. 1 week, Mrs. Wren. Then you're gone, and I don't want to hear about how she's still too weak, or it's too far, or any other excuse. 1 week. 1 week, Eliza agreed. "I promise." He nodded once, then reached up and lifted Clara from the wagon with surprising gentleness. The child didn't protest, just let her head rest against his shoulder. "Get your things. Take them back inside." Maisie climbed down silently, grabbed their bags. Eliza followed with shaking legs. 1 week. It wasn't much, but it was more than they'd had 5 minutes ago. It was enough to work with. They settled back into the cabin with careful quiet, as though too much noise might remind Thatcher he'd made a mistake. Clara went immediately to bed. Maisie sat at the table, her face carefully blank. Eliza stood in the middle of the room and tried to figure out what to do next. The answer came from an unexpected place. Through the window, she could see the state of the yard. Overgrown grass, scattered tools, a general air of neglect that spoke of a man who'd stopped caring about anything beyond basic survival. The inside of the cabin told the same story. Clean enough, but stark. No curtains, no rugs, nothing soft or comfortable. A place to exist, not to live. If she wanted to earn more than 1 week, she'd have to prove their value. She started with the dishes. There weren't many. Thatcher apparently didn't believe in accumulation, but what existed was stacked haphazardly on shelves. Eliza washed everything, dried it, reorganized the shelves by size and function. Then she swept the floor, cleared cobwebs from the corners, wiped down surfaces that hadn't seen a cloth in months. Maisie watched for a while, then quietly joined in. Together they transformed the cabin from bachelor quarters to something approaching a home. Thatcher came in at noon, stopped in the doorway, and stared. "Needed something to do," Eliza said simply. "Hope you don't mind." He grunted something non-committal and went to check on his pantry. Eliza had reorganized that too, but she'd been careful not to throw anything away, just created order where there'd been chaos. "There's bread and cheese if you're hungry," she offered. "I can make something hot if you prefer." "Bread's fine." He took what he needed, then retreated outside to eat alone. Eliza watched him go and made a decision. He wanted distance? She'd give him distance, but she'd also make sure he saw every single day what they could offer. Not companionship, he'd made clear he didn't want that, but competence, capability, value. The afternoon passed in similar fashion. While Clara slept and Maisie read from one of the books on Thatcher's shelf, Eliza inventoried supplies and started a list of what needed doing. The list grew quickly. Mending, weeding the garden, organizing the barn, a dozen other tasks that a ranch required and a single man couldn't keep up with. She started with the mending. By evening, she'd repaired 3 shirts, 2 pairs of work pants, and a coat with a torn seam. She'd also started bread dough rising for tomorrow. When Thatcher came in for dinner, she had stew waiting, made from supplies she'd found in his pantry, nothing wasted. He ate in silence, but she noticed he had 2 bowls. Progress. That night, Eliza lay awake again, listening to her daughters breathe and planning. 1 week wasn't long enough to change a man's mind about something fundamental, but it might be long enough to make him reconsider what was practical. She just had to be smart about it. The next morning, she was up before dawn. She fed the chickens she'd discovered behind the barn, collected eggs, and had breakfast ready when Thatcher emerged. He looked surprised, then wary, but he sat down and ate. What are your plans today? Eliza asked. Fence repair on the north pasture. Why? Just wondering if there's anything you need from the house. I'm doing laundry. He shook his head slowly. You don't have to. I know, but it needs doing, and I'm here. She met his eyes. Might as well be useful. Something flickered in his expression, but he didn't argue. He finished eating, nodded his thanks, and left. Eliza spent the day turning Thatcher's neglected household into something functional. She did laundry, scrubbing clothes in a basin and hanging them to dry in the sun. She weeded the garden, salvaging what vegetables had survived his indifferent care. She made careful note of what was missing: proper curtains, decent cookware, spices that would make his monotonous diet more bearable. Maisie helped with increasing enthusiasm. The girl had her mother's practical streak. She understood they were proving their worth, and she threw herself into it with determined efficiency. Clara, still recovering, sat in the shade and peeled potatoes, sorted beans, did small tasks that made her feel included. When Thatcher returned that evening, the cabin smelled of baking bread and simmering stew. The floor was clean, his clothes were folded on the chair, and three females looked up when he entered with expressions ranging from wary hope to cautious pride. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, and Eliza saw him truly see what they'd done. Not just cleaned, transformed. Made his house into something that felt lived in. Smells good, he said finally. It was the first unprompted positive thing he'd said to them. Rabbit stew, Eliza replied. Maisie caught 2 rabbits in snares she set this morning. Thatcher's eyebrows rose slightly as he looked at Maisie. You know how to trap? Maisie shrugged, trying to hide her pleasure at his surprise. My pa taught me before he died. Well, Thatcher hung his hat on the peg by the door. Good work. Maisie's face lit up before she could stop it. They ate together that night, still mostly in silence, but it was a different quality of silence, less hostile, more uncertain, like people who didn't know the rules of engagement yet, but were willing to figure them out. After dinner, while Eliza washed dishes, Thatcher spoke from behind her. You didn't have to do all this. I know. I meant what I said. 1 week. I know that too. She didn't turn around. But while we're here, we might as well pull our weight. She heard him move toward the door, then stop. Your daughter, Maisie. She's got a good eye for country work. She's had to grow up fast. That's hard on a child. Yes. Eliza finally turned to face him. But it's also made her strong. Both of them are stronger than you'd think. Thatcher studied her for a moment. So are you. It wasn't quite a compliment, but it wasn't criticism either. Eliza took it for what it was. Acknowledgement. Thank you for giving us this week, Mr. Thatcher. I know it wasn't easy. He shrugged. Like you said, you're here. Might as well make use of it. But there was something in his eyes that suggested it was more than that. Something he wasn't ready to name yet. The days fell into a rhythm. Thatcher worked the ranch with the kind of focused intensity that came from using labor to avoid thinking. Eliza and Maisie worked the house and garden with equal intensity, proving their value with every mended fence, every organized shelf, every meal that was more than beans and hardtack. Clara gained strength slowly, her body recovering from the near-death experience. She was quiet, watchful, but occasionally Eliza would catch her smiling at something. A butterfly, the chickens, the way Thatcher's horse nuzzled his shoulder when he brought oats. On the 4th day, Eliza found Thatcher's ledger. She hadn't been snooping. She'd been organizing his desk with permission, and there it was. A record of ranch expenses and income that made her heart sink. He was barely breaking even. 1 bad season, 1 injured animal, 1 unexpected expense, and he'd be in trouble. That evening, after the girls were in bed, she approached him. Mr. Thatcher, I found your ledger. His expression closed. You had no right. You told me to organize the desk. It was there. She held up her hands. I'm not judging, but I noticed some things. Your expense categories are overlapping, which makes it hard to track where money's actually going. And your income projections don't account for seasonal variation. He stared at her. You know bookkeeping. My husband ran a store. I did all his accounts. She hesitated. If you wanted, I could reorganize your ledger, make it clearer. It wouldn't take long. Why would you do that if you're leaving in 3 days? Good question. Eliza met his eyes. Because it needs doing. And because even if we leave, I'd like to think I left this place better than I found it. Thatcher was quiet for a long time. Then he pushed the ledger across the table toward her. Do what you think is best. She worked on it that night and the next, rebuilding his accounting system into something that actually made sense. When she showed him the results, he studied the neat columns, the clear categories, the projections that now accurately reflected reality. This is good work, he said quietly. Thank you. Where'd you learn to do this? Necessity. Thomas wasn't good with numbers. Someone had to be. Thatcher ran a finger down one column, then looked up at her. The week's almost over. I know. Claire's better now. Yes. So you could travel. Eliza's throat tightened. Yes, we could. He closed the ledger carefully. Where would you go? I don't know. There's a town east of here. Millerville, I think the map said. We'd start there. Look for work. Find a place. She tried to sound confident, but they both knew the reality. A widow with 2 children and no references would be lucky to find factory work. They'd be poor, vulnerable, easy targets for men like Gideon if he ever tracked them down. You did good work here, Thatcher said. The house, the garden, the ledger, all of it. We tried. More than tried. He stood, walked to the window, looked out at the darkening valley. I told myself when Sarah died that I was done. Done with family, done with caring, done with risking that kind of pain again. It seems simpler to just exist. Do the work, keep the ranch running, don't let anyone close enough to hurt me. Eliza waited, hardly breathing. But the thing about living like that, he continued, is it's not really living, it's just waiting to die. He turned to face her. This week, with you 3 here, the house feels different, not just cleaner, fuller, like it's supposed to have people in it. Mr. Thatcher, I'm not saying this right. He rubbed the back of his neck, frustrated. What I mean is, you could stay, if you wanted, not as, I don't know what as. We'd figure it out. But you'd have a place here. Safety. For you and the girls. Eliza's heart hammered. Are you sure? No. He laughed, a short, sharp sound. I'm not sure of anything except that sending you back out there feels wrong, and having this place go back to being empty feels wrong, and maybe 2 wrongs don't make a right, but at least they add up to something. It wasn't a declaration of love or even affection. It was practical, tentative, guarded, but it was also an offer of exactly what they needed: shelter, safety, a chance. Yes, Eliza said. Yes, we'll stay. Thatcher nodded, relief flickering across his face before he locked it down again. Good. Then tomorrow we'll need to discuss terms, how this works, what the arrangement is. Of course. And rules, boundaries, He stopped, started again. I'm not ready for more than this. A working arrangement. I understand. Do you? He looked at her intently. Because I need you to know what you're agreeing to. I'm not going to be a father to your daughters. I'm not going to be a husband to you in anything but name. This is about survival and practicality, nothing more. That's all I'm asking for, Eliza said, even though part of her knew it was a lie. She was asking for safety. She was asking for a home. And maybe eventually she was asking for the kind of partnership that could become something more. But she could wait for that. She could be patient. She'd survived worse than patience. Then we have an agreement, Thatcher said. He held out his hand, and after a moment, Eliza shook it. His grip was firm, calloused, warm. When she went to bed that night, she lay between her daughters and let herself feel something she hadn't felt in 2 years. Hope. Fragile, uncertain hope, but hope nonetheless. They could stay. They had a place. And if Cole Thatcher needed to pretend this was purely practical, she could let him have that fiction. Because she'd seen the way he looked at Clara when he thought no one was watching. She'd seen the way he listened when Maisie talked about her trapping. She'd seen the way his shoulders had relaxed over the course of the week. The way the hard lines around his mouth had softened just slightly. He was a man who'd convinced himself he was done with feeling, but feelings didn't ask permission, they just were. And Eliza was nothing if not patient. She could wait for Cole Thatcher to figure out what she already knew, that some risks were worth taking even when you'd been hurt before. That family wasn't just blood, but choice and effort, and showing up day after day. That sometimes the best things came from the worst circumstances, if you were brave enough to let them. Outside, the Wyoming night was vast and cold. But inside, in a rough cabin in a remote valley, four people who'd all lost something had found the beginning of something new. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even easy. But it was a start. The arrangement worked for exactly 11 days before the first crack appeared. Eliza woke to raised voices outside, Thatcher's low rumble and another man's sharper tone. She pulled on her wrapper and went to the window. A stranger stood in the yard, heavy-set and red-faced, gesturing emphatically while Thatcher listened with his arms crossed. Maisie appeared at her elbow. "Who's that?" "I don't know. Stay inside with Clara." Eliza slipped outside, keeping to the porch. The stranger noticed her immediately, and his expression shifted from anger to something calculating. "Well now," he said. "Didn't know you had company, Thatcher." "She's my wife." Thatcher's voice was flat.
"What do you want, Brennan?" Wife. The word hung in the air like smoke. They hadn't discussed using that term yet, hadn't made anything official beyond the handshake agreement that she could stay. But Thatcher had claimed it without hesitation, and Eliza understood why. A woman living unmarried in a bachelor's home was fodder for exactly the kind of trouble this man's eyes promised. Brennan's gaze raked over Eliza with open speculation. "Wife, that's so." "Funny, I was in Millerville 2 weeks back and didn't hear about any wedding." "We kept it quiet." Thatcher shifted slightly, putting himself more fully between Brennan and the house. "Now state your business or move along." "My business is that fence line on the eastern border. You've got posts on my side of the boundary marker." "Those posts have been there for 5 years. Your father agreed to the line when he sold me the land." "My father's dead." Brennan smiled without warmth. "And I'm reviewing all his arrangements. That strip of land should be mine, and I want the fence moved." "No." "No?" Brennan's face darkened. "You don't get to just say no, Thatcher. That's my land." "It's not. I have the deed properly marked and witnessed. If you have a problem with it, take it up with the land office in Cheyenne." "Maybe I'll do that. And maybe while I'm at it, I'll mention how you've got a woman and children living here now. Folks might be interested to hear about that, seeing as how nobody in town knew Cole Thatcher was the marrying kind." The threat was barely veiled. Eliza felt ice slide down her spine. This was exactly what she'd feared. Attention, questions, the kind of scrutiny that could lead someone to wire back to Missouri asking about a widow named Eliza Wren. Thatcher's voice dropped dangerously low. "You threatening me, Brennan?" "Just making conversation." Brennan turned his horse. "But I'll be back about that fence line. You can count on it." He rode off, leaving dust and tension in his wake. Thatcher stood motionless until he was out of sight, then turned to Eliza. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have called you my wife without asking first." "No, you did right. A man like that—" She wrapped her arms around herself. "He'd use anything he could against us. He's a bastard who's been looking for an excuse to push me since his father died." Thatcher's jaw was tight. "That land's mine, legally and properly, but he doesn't care about legal. What will he do? His trouble? Spread talk. Try to force me into selling at a loss." He looked at her, and something shifted in his expression. "I didn't think about how having you here might complicate things. Give him more ammunition." "You want us to leave?" It wasn't a question. "No." The word came quickly. "But we need to make this look legitimate. If Brennan starts asking around and people find out we're not actually married—" "We get married." Eliza said it before she could think about it. "For real, legally." Thatcher stared at her. "You'd do that?" "It's practical, like you said. An arrangement. But one that gives us both legal protection." She met his eyes. "You need help running this ranch. I need safety for my daughters. A marriage license accomplishes both." "Marriage is more than a piece of paper." "It can be. Or it can be exactly what we make it. A contract between two people who need each other for practical reasons." She kept her voice steady. "You said yourself this was about survival and practicality. Well, this is the most practical solution." He was quiet for a long time, studying her face like he was looking for the trap. Finally, "You're sure?" "Yes." "It wouldn't be a real marriage, not in the ways that usually matter." "I know."
And you'd be willing to... He stopped, started again. You'd take my name, be legally bound to me, without any expectation that I'd be a husband in truth? Yes. Eliza forced herself to sound certain. I understand what this is, Mr. Thatcher. I'm not expecting romance or affection, just partnership. Another long silence. Then Thatcher nodded slowly. All right, we'll go to town tomorrow. Make it official. He walked away before she could respond, heading toward the barn with his shoulders tight. Eliza stood on the porch, watching him go, and wondered what she'd just agreed to. A practical marriage to a man who'd made it abundantly clear he had nothing left to give emotionally. A legal binding that would protect her daughters, but trap her in a partnership with someone who saw her as useful at best. It was still better than Gideon. She clung to that thought as she went back inside to tell the girls they were about to acquire a stepfather who didn't want to be one. The ride to Millerville the next day was tense. Thatcher drove the wagon with Eliza beside him, the girls in back. Nobody spoke much. What was there to say? They were on their way to formalize a lie into legal truth. Millerville was larger than Eliza had expected, a proper town with a main street, general store, blacksmith, hotel, and church. People watched as they rolled past, curious eyes tracking the unknown woman sitting beside Cole Thatcher. The land office doubled as the justice of the peace. A thin man with wire spectacles looked up when they entered. Help you? Need to register a marriage, Thatcher said. The clerk's eyebrows rose slightly. Well now, Cole Thatcher getting married. That's news. His gaze slid to Eliza. And who's the lucky lady? Eliza Wren, soon to be Thatcher. Any witnesses? The girls can witness, Thatcher said, gesturing to where Maisie and Clara stood uncertainly by the door. Children can't witness legal documents. Need 2 adults? The clerk tapped his pen against the ledger. I can be one. Just need to find someone else. As if summoned by the problem, the door opened and a woman swept in. Middle-aged, well-dressed, with sharp eyes that took in everything at once. Joseph, I need you to... Oh. She stopped, looking at their group with undisguised interest. I'm interrupting. Actually, Mrs. Brennan, your timing's perfect. These folks need a witness for a marriage certificate. Brennan, the same name as the man who'd threatened Thatcher yesterday. Eliza's stomach dropped, but Thatcher's expression didn't change. Of course. Mrs. Brennan's smile was all politeness with steel underneath. I'd be happy to help. I don't believe we've met. I'm Margaret Brennan. Eliza Wren. And these are my daughters, Maisie and Clara. Charming. Margaret's eyes lingered on the girls, then moved to Thatcher. Cole, I didn't know you were courting. It was quick, Thatcher said. Clearly. Well, Joseph, let's get these 2 properly married, shall we? The ceremony was perfunctory. They stood before the clerk's desk while he read from a book of standard vows. Thatcher's responses were steady but mechanical. Eliza's voice shook only once, when she promised to honor and cherish a man who'd explicitly told her not to expect either from him. Do you have a ring? The clerk asked. Thatcher hesitated, then pulled a thin gold band from his pocket. Eliza recognized it instantly, a woman's wedding ring, delicate and worn. His first wife's. Her throat tightened as he slid it onto her finger. It fit reasonably well, though it was loose enough to spin. The metal was warm from his pocket, and she wondered how long he'd been carrying it. I now pronounce you man and wife. The clerk made a notation in his ledger. Congratulations. Margaret Brennan signed as witness with a flourish, then smiled at Eliza with predatory warmth. You must come to tea soon. I'm sure all the ladies will want to meet Cole's new bride. That's kind of you, Eliza managed. Not at all. We're practically neighbors, after all. My son Henry's land adjoins Cole's on the eastern border. Her smile sharpened. I'm sure you'll be seeing a lot of each other. The threat was delicate but clear. They left quickly, Thatcher's hand tight on Eliza's elbow. Outside, he helped her into the wagon without speaking, then lifted the girls up. They were half a mile out of town before Maisie broke the silence. She knew. Knew what? Eliza turned to look back at her. That this isn't real. Mrs. Brennan, she knew. Thatcher's hands tightened on the reins. Doesn't matter what she thinks she knows. She's going to tell people, Maisie insisted. She's going to say you married Mama too fast, that something's wrong, and people will start asking questions. Let them ask. Thatcher's voice was hard. We're legally married now. That's all that matters. But it wasn't, and they all knew it. Legal marriage was one thing. Social acceptance was another. And in a frontier community where reputation was currency, suspicion could be as damaging as fact. That night, Eliza lay awake in the bedroom that was now legally hers by marriage. Thatcher had moved his belongings to a small room off the kitchen, insisting that she and the girls take the main bedroom. The ring on her finger felt strange and heavy. She turned it slowly, thinking about the woman who'd worn it before her. Sarah Thatcher, who'd loved Cole enough to come to this remote valley, who'd died here, along with their child, leaving him so broken he'd spent 3 years refusing to feel anything. And now Eliza wore her ring in a marriage that was legal but hollow, bound to a man who'd made it clear he could offer nothing beyond shelter and a name. A sound from the other room made her freeze, Thatcher moving around. A moment later, she heard the front door open and close. She went to the window and saw him walking toward the barn, his stride purposeful even in the dark. He couldn't sleep either. Eliza pulled on her wrapper and followed. The barn was lit by a single lantern. Thatcher stood beside his horse's stall, one hand on the animal's neck, staring at nothing. He didn't turn when she approached. Couldn't sleep? She asked quietly. Never can after going to town. Because of the people? Or the memories? Both. He finally looked at her. I met Sarah in Millerville, at the general store. She was visiting her aunt, and I was buying supplies. She dropped a bag of flour, and it split everywhere, and I helped her clean it up. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. She had flour in her hair when I asked if I could call on her. Eliza's chest ached. She must have been special. She was. Too good for this place, really. Too good for me. But she came anyway, and she never complained. Not about the isolation, not about the hard work, not about any of it. His voice roughened. Then she got pregnant, and everything changed. What happened? Winter labor? Baby came early? There were complications. Bleeding that wouldn't stop. I rode for the doctor, but by the time we got back, he stopped, swallowed hard. The baby was already gone. Sarah held on for another day, long enough to tell me it wasn't my fault, long enough to make me promise I'd keep living. I'm sorry, Eliza whispered. I broke that promise, or tried to. I didn't die, but I stopped living, stopped feeling. Thought if I just went through the motions, eventually it would hurt less. He looked at the ring on her finger. I shouldn't have given you that. It wasn't fair to Sarah's memory, and it wasn't fair to you. It's all right. It's not. He pulled the ring off her finger before she could protest. You deserve your own ring, not a dead woman's. Cole, I'll get you one. A new one. Something that's yours. He met her eyes. I'm not good at this. Any of this. But you took my name today, and that means something, even if we both know why we really did it. Eliza studied his face in the lamplight. Why did we? Really? You needed protection from Gideon. I needed help with the ranch and someone to stop Brennan's son from spreading poison. He paused. And maybe I needed to stop being alone before it killed me, even if I'm too much of a coward to admit that's what this is. You're not a coward. I'm terrified. The admission seemed to cost him. Of caring again, of losing again, of being the kind of husband and father those girls need because I already failed at it once. You didn't fail. You lost someone you loved to something you couldn't control. Tell that to the part of me that thinks if I'd just been faster, done more, somehow saved them. His voice cracked. Eliza did something she'd promised herself she wouldn't do. She reached out and took his hand. You can't save everyone, Cole. Sometimes life just takes what it wants, and all we can do is survive it. He looked down at their joined hands. Is that what we're doing? Surviving? For now. Maybe someday it'll be more than that. She squeezed his fingers once, then let go. But we don't have to figure that out tonight. He nodded slowly. Thank you. For understanding, for not expecting things I can't give. Thank you for giving what you can. She turned to leave, then paused. Cole? Those girls in there? They've lost their father. They've run from a dangerous man. They're scared and trying to be brave, and they watch everything you do to figure out if you're safe. So when you're ready, even if it's just small things, noticing when Maisie sets her snares,
or asking Clara about the book she's reading, it would mean more than you know. She left him in the barn, hoping she hadn't pushed too hard. But the next morning, when Maisie came in with 2 rabbits, Thatcher looked up from his coffee and said, "Good catch. You want to learn how to dress them properly, the way my father taught me?" Maisie's face lit up like sunrise. "Really?" "Really. Come on." Eliza watched them go, her throat tight. It was a small thing, just a man teaching a girl how to clean game. But it was also an opening, a tiny crack in the wall Cole had built around himself. It was progress. The next few weeks fell into a careful rhythm. Thatcher worked the ranch, teaching Maisie skills she absorbed like a sponge.
Eliza ran the household, cooked, cleaned, managed the ledgers with increasing confidence. Clara recovered fully, her natural shyness giving way to cautious curiosity about this strange new life. They were careful around each other, Cole and Eliza. Polite, professional. 2 people sharing space and work but not intimacy. Except sometimes, late at night, she'd hear him pacing. And sometimes he'd find her in the kitchen before dawn, unable to sleep, and they'd share coffee in companionable silence. They were learning each other, the way you'd learn a business partner or a friend. But the girls were learning something different. To them, Cole was becoming a constant, someone who showed up, who taught, who noticed. He didn't use affectionate words or offer embraces, but he remembered that Maisie liked her eggs scrambled, and Clara was afraid of thunder. Small things. But to children who'd been betrayed by the men in their lives, small, consistent things mattered more than grand gestures. It was Clara who broke through first. A storm rolled in one afternoon, violent and sudden. Thunder cracked like rifles, and Clara bolted from the table where she'd been reading, looking for Eliza. But Eliza was in the root cellar, checking supplies. Cole was there instead. He looked down at the terrified child, clearly uncomfortable. "Your mother's just outside." "She'll be back in a minute." Another crash of thunder. Clara whimpered and, without thinking, grabbed onto his leg. Cole froze. For a moment, Eliza, who'd just come in from the cellar, thought he might pull away. Then, slowly, awkwardly, he put his hand on Clara's head. "It's just noise," he said gruffly. "Can't hurt you. It's the lightning you watch for." "I don't like it," Clara whispered into his leg. "I know, but you're safe here. This house has weathered worse storms than this." But Claire didn't let go until the thunder passed. When she finally did, she looked up at him with complete trust. "Thank you, Mr. Thatcher." "Cole," he said. "You can call me Cole." It was a small permission, but the way his eyes found Eliza's across the room told her he understood the weight of it. That night, after the girls were asleep, Eliza found him on the porch. "That was kind. What you did with Clara. She was scared. You could have sent her away, told her to find me." "I could have." He stared out at the darkness. "But she needed someone right then, and I was there." "That's what family does," Eliza said quietly. "They're there." Cole didn't respond, but something in his posture softened. They stood together in the dark, listening to the rain. Not touching, not speaking, but not alone either. It wasn't love. It wasn't even friendship yet. But it was something. A foundation being built one careful stone at a time. And for people who'd both learned that foundations could crumble, that was worth protecting. The letter arrived 6 weeks after the wedding, delivered by a rider who'd come all the way from Cheyenne with a bundle of mail for the scattered ranches in the valley. Eliza recognized the handwriting before she even opened it, and her blood turned to ice. Gideon had found her. She stood in the yard with the envelope shaking in her hands while Cole unhitched the wagon nearby. He noticed immediately, the way he'd learned to notice everything about her in the careful dance of their shared life. "What is it?" She handed him the letter without speaking. He read it once, his face darkening with each line, then read it again. "He's threatening to take the girls." Cole's voice was dangerously quiet. "Claiming you're an unfit mother who ran off with strangers, that he has a legal right as their blood relation to provide for them." "He has no rights." But Eliza's voice shook. "Thomas's will left them in my care. Gideon's just their uncle by marriage. That may not matter if he can convince a judge you're unstable." Cole looked up from the letter. "He says he's already filed a petition in Missouri, that he's bringing a lawyer here to contest your custody." The world tilted. Eliza sat down hard on the porch steps. He can't do this." "He can if he lies well enough."
Cole crouched in front of her.
What exactly did he do back in St. Louis? What made you run? Eliza had told him some of it, but not everything. Now with Gideon's threat stark on paper, she couldn't afford to hide anymore. He wanted control. Of me. Of the girls. He said Thomas would have wanted him to look after us, that we needed a man's protection. At first I thought he was just being helpful, but then he started making decisions without asking me. Where we should live, how to spend money, who we should associate with. When I pushed back, he got angry, said I was being ungrateful. And Maisie? Eliza's throat tightened. He looked at her differently, started commenting on how she was growing up, how she'd need guidance soon. One night he came by late, drunk, and tried to get into our rooms. I locked the door, and he just stood there, breathing and muttering about family obligations. After that, I knew we had to leave. Cole's jaw was granite. Did he touch her? Not that I know of, but it was coming.
I could feel it. She looked at him desperately. That's why I lied to you. That's why I couldn't tell you the truth in my letter, because if you'd said no, we would have had nowhere to go, and Gideon would have... I understand. He stood, the letter clenched in his fist. And he's not taking them. Not now. Not ever. Cole, if he brings a lawyer, if he goes to court, then we go to court too. We fight this. On what grounds? I'm a widow who traveled across the country to marry a stranger. He'll paint me as desperate and reckless, and he won't be entirely wrong. You're not a widow anymore. You're my wife. Cole's voice hardened with resolve. And those girls are under my protection now. That changes the picture considerably. Does it? We've been married less than 2 months. Any lawyer worth his salt will claim it's a marriage of convenience, that I used you to hide from family who had legitimate concerns. Let them claim it. The law recognizes our marriage regardless of motive. He paused, something shifting in his expression. But there's one thing that would make it harder for Gideon to challenge. What? Adoption. If I legally adopt Maisie and Clara, they become my daughters in the eyes of the law. That supersedes any blood relation Gideon might claim. Eliza stared at him. You'd do that? Bind yourself legally to children you didn't want in the first place? I didn't want complications, but they're already here, and sending them back to a man like that is not an option. He met her eyes. I'm not doing this out of affection, Eliza. Don't mistake practicality for sentiment. But those girls deserve better than Gideon Wren, and if putting my name on a piece of paper gives them legal protection, then that's what we'll do. It should have hurt, hearing him lay out so clearly that this was strategy, not care. But Eliza had learned to take what she could get. All right, how do we do this? We need a lawyer, a good one who can handle both the adoption and Gideon's challenge. Cole folded the letter and put it in his pocket. There's a man in Cheyenne, Daniel Morrison. He handled the land dispute with Brennan's father years back. He's sharp, and he doesn't back down from a fight. That's 3 days' travel. Then we leave tomorrow. He looked toward the house where the girls were inside, unaware that their fragile safety was under attack. They'll need to come with us. I'm not leaving them here alone, and I don't trust anyone else to watch them. That night, Eliza told the girls. Maisie's face went white, then red with fury. Clara started crying silently, the way she'd learned to cry when making noise was dangerous. I told you, Maisie said, her voice shaking. I told you Uncle Gideon would find us. And we'll fight him. Eliza pulled Clara into her lap. Mr. Thatcher, Cole, is going to help us. We're going to see a lawyer who can make sure Gideon can't take you. How? Maisie's eyes were fierce and frightened. He has money. He has friends. He has lawyers who already filed papers. What do we have? Cole spoke from the doorway where he'd been listening. You have me, and my name, and a legal marriage that makes you both my stepdaughters under territorial law. He looked at Maisie directly. If you agree, I can make it more than that. I can adopt you, both of you. Make you Thatchers in full. Maisie stared at him. Why would you do that? Because your mother's my wife, which makes you my responsibility. And because no man who terrorizes children gets to win if I have anything to say about it. You don't even like us, Maisie said, but there was a question underneath the accusation. I don't dislike you. Cole's voice was careful. You're smart, hardworking, and you've handled more than most adults could manage. Clara's quieter, but just as strong in her own way. Whether I like you or not isn't the point. The point is you're here, you're under my protection,
and I don't abandon my responsibilities. It wasn't the warm declaration a child might hope for, but it was honest, and Maisie had learned to value honesty over pretty lies. If you adopt us, she said slowly, does that mean you'd be our father? Legally? Yes. And Uncle Gideon couldn't take us away? It would be much harder for him to make that case. Cole paused. I can't promise there won't be a fight, but I can promise I'll fight beside you. Maisie looked at Clara, some silent communication passing between the sisters. Then she nodded. All right, we'll do it. They left at dawn, the wagon packed for a week's journey. The trip to Cheyenne was long and tense. Eliza watched the landscape roll past and tried not to imagine all the ways this could go wrong. Gideon was smart, connected, and he'd had weeks to build his case while they'd been establishing their fragile new life. Cole drove in silence, his face set in hard lines. He'd loaded a rifle beneath the seat, just in case, he'd said, though he wouldn't specify what he was preparing for. The girls sat in the back, Maisie with her arm around Clara, both of them too quiet. They made camp the first night beside a creek, the horses picketed nearby. Cole built a fire while Eliza prepared a simple meal. The girls spread their bedrolls close together, seeking comfort in proximity. After they'd eaten, Clara climbed into Eliza's lap despite being almost too big for it. Mama, what if the judge believes Uncle Gideon? Then we'll appeal to a higher court. And if that doesn't work? Eliza looked at Cole, who was checking the rifle's mechanism with methodical precision. He'd heard the question, she could tell by the tension in his shoulders. It'll work, he said without looking up. Morrison's good at his job. We just need to present the facts clearly. What facts? Maisie asked. That Mama was so scared she lied to a stranger and dragged us across the country? That you married her out of pity and now you're adopting us to keep some man you've never met from winning in court? Maisie, Eliza began, but Cole cut her off. Those aren't the facts a court will hear. He finally looked at Maisie. The facts are that your mother, faced with an increasingly dangerous situation, made the difficult choice to remove you from harm's way. That she answered an honest advertisement for a marriage arrangement, which is a perfectly legal and common practice on the frontier. That I, aware of her circumstances, chose to marry her and provide a stable home for her children. And that upon discovering the extent of the threat from Gideon Wren, I decided to formalize my commitment to your family's protection through legal adoption. You make it sound reasonable when you say it like that, Maisie said. That's because it is reasonable. People make practical marriages all the time out here. The only unusual part is that it's worked out well enough that I want to make the arrangement permanent. Eliza's heart stuttered. Permanent? Cole met her eyes across the fire. That's what adoption means. Those girls become mine legally, with all the rights and responsibilities that entails, which means if Gideon wants to take them, he'll have to prove I'm an unfit father, not just that you're an unfit mother. And I've got 3 years of running a successful ranch and a reputation for being a hard but fair man to back me up. It was strategy. Just strategy. But the way he said those girls become mine made something warm and dangerous bloom in Eliza's chest. They reached Cheyenne late on the third day, dusty and exhausted. The territorial capital was bigger than anything the girls had seen since St. Louis. Wide streets, brick buildings, the noise and press of civilization. Cole found them rooms at a modest hotel, then went to locate Daniel Morrison while Eliza helped the girls wash off the trail dust. He returned 2 hours later with news. Morrison will see us tomorrow morning. I gave him the basics. He wants to hear the full story from you, Eliza, and he'll want to meet the girls. What did he say about our chances? That it depends on what Gideon can prove versus what we can prove. If it comes down to a credibility contest, we need to be unshakable. Cole glanced at where the girls were supposed to be resting in the adjoining room. He also said children's testimony can be powerful if it's given honestly. Maisie's old enough that a judge would likely listen to her. No, Eliza's voice was sharp. I won't put her through that. Having to stand in court and talk about what Gideon did, or almost did. It might be necessary. Then we'll find another way. Cole studied her for a moment, then nodded. We'll see what Morrison says. But Eliza, if it comes down to Maisie testifying or losing the case, it won't come to that. But both of them knew it might. Daniel Morrison's office was neat and organized, much like the man himself. He was perhaps 50, with silver in his dark hair and eyes that missed nothing. He listened while Eliza recounted everything: Thomas's death, Gideon's increasing control, the night he'd tried their door, the desperate decision to answer Cole's advertisement. When she finished, Morrison leaned back in his chair. "You understand that Gideon's lawyer will paint you as a hysterical woman who overreacted to innocent family concern." "I wasn't hysterical. I was afraid." "Fear and hysteria look similar to men who've decided you're unreliable." He turned to Cole. "And they'll question your motives too. Why would a successful rancher marry a desperate widow with 2 children unless he was either foolish or being deceived?" "I needed help with the ranch," Cole said evenly. "The marriage was mutually beneficial." "And the adoption?" "The girls are hardworking and capable. They've proven their value. Making the arrangement permanent protects everyone's interests." Morrison made a note. "That's good. Practical, defensible. Doesn't rely on sentiment that a court might see as suspect." He looked at Eliza. "The challenge is that Gideon has apparently gathered testimony from neighbors in St. Louis claiming you were emotionally unstable after your husband's death, that you made erratic decisions, that the children seemed neglected." Eliza's stomach dropped. "That's not true. Truth matters less than what can be proven. Do you have anyone who can testify on your behalf? Friends, clergy, business associates?" No. After Thomas died, I kept to myself. I was working as a seamstress from home to make ends meet. I didn't have time for social calls. What about the girls' school teacher, doctor, anyone who had regular contact with them? Maisie spoke from the corner where she'd been sitting silently. "Mrs. Patterson. She ran the school near our boarding house. She liked us." Morrison looked at her appraisingly. "Would she testify that you and your sister were well cared for?" "I think so. She used to give me books to borrow because she said I was her best reader." "That's something." Morrison made another note. "I'll send inquiries to St. Louis, see if we can locate this Mrs. Patterson, and get a statement. In the meantime, we need to build the case that you've created a stable home here in Wyoming." He looked at Cole. "How long have they been living with you?" 2 months since they arrived. 6 weeks since the marriage. "And in that time, have there been any problems? Any indication the children are unhappy or mistreated?" "No," Cole said. "They've adapted well. The older girl, Maisie, has learned ranch work quickly. The younger one, Clara, helps her mother with household tasks. Both are healthy and better off than when they arrived." "Can anyone else attest to this? Neighbors, business associates, people who've seen you together?" Eliza thought of Margaret Brennan's calculating eyes. "There's a woman in Millerville, Mrs. Brennan. She witnessed our marriage certificate, but I don't think she'd say anything favorable." "Why not?" "Her son has a land dispute with my husband. She's not friendly." Morrison's expression sharpened. "How serious is this dispute?" "Henry Brennan wants a strip of land I own legally," Cole said. "He's been making noise about contesting the boundary line. His mother doesn't like that I won't negotiate." "This could actually work in our favor," Morrison said slowly. "If Brennan's family has motive to discredit you, and if they're the ones spreading rumors about your marriage being suspicious, that establishes bias. We can argue that any negative testimony from Millerville residents is tainted by the land dispute." It was strategic thinking, the kind that turned human messiness into legal advantage. Eliza should have felt relieved, but instead she felt soiled. This was what it came down to. Not truth or justice, but who could build the better argument. They spent 3 more days in Cheyenne, while Morrison prepared the adoption papers and sent inquiries to St. Louis. Cole filed formal responses to Gideon's petition, establishing his legal standing as the girl's stepfather and his intention to adopt. Morrison drafted carefully worded statements about the marriage being a common frontier arrangement, emphasizing Cole's respectability and the improved circumstances of the children. On the 4th day, as they prepared to return to the ranch, Morrison called them back to his office. His expression was grave. "Gideon's lawyer has requested a formal hearing. They want it held in St. Louis, claiming that's where the children's legal residence was established." "No," Eliza's voice was sharp. "We're not going back there. I've already filed for the hearing to be moved to territorial jurisdiction, since that's where you currently reside and where the marriage took place. But Eliza, you need to understand, if the judge rules that Missouri has jurisdiction, you'll be required to appear there or forfeit by default." Then we fight to keep it here. We will. But there's something else. Morrison handed Cole a document. Gideon has hired a Pinkerton agent to investigate your background. They're going to dig up everything they can about the marriage, the ranch, your past. If there's anything questionable in your history, now is the time to tell me. Cole's face went blank in that way Eliza had learned meant he was concealing emotion. What kind of questionable? Anything that could be used to paint you as unstable, violent, financially irresponsible, or morally compromised. Debts, disputes, allegations of any kind. I was investigated after my wife and child died, Cole said quietly. There were questions about whether I'd done enough to save them. The doctor cleared me, said there was nothing anyone could have done, but some people in town talked anyway. Morrison's pen scratched across paper. We can address that. Medical testimony supporting your actions, time elapsed since the incident, evidence of stable life since then. What else? Nothing. I keep to myself, pay my debts, run my ranch honestly. He paused. But my neighbors will tell you I'm hard to get along with, antisocial, that I drove off the last hired hand who tried to work for me because I expect things done exactly right. That's manageable. We frame it as high standards and self-reliance, not antisocial behavior. Morrison looked at Eliza. What about you? Anything besides what you've already told me? Eliza's mind raced through the past 2 years. Thomas had debts when he died. I paid what I could, but some businesses wrote off the rest. Does that matter? It shows financial hardship, which supports your motive for seeking a practical marriage arrangement. That's actually helpful. Morrison set down his pen. All right, here's what happens next. I'll continue working on getting the hearing moved to Wyoming Territorial Court. In the meantime, you go home, you live your lives as normally as possible, and you document everything. Keep records of the girls' education, their health, their daily routine. If anyone questions you about your marriage or family, refer them to me. Do not engage with Gideon or anyone representing him without legal counsel present. When will we know about the hearing? Cole asked. 4 to 6 weeks. I'll send word as soon as I have a date. Morrison stood, offering his hand. Mr. Thatcher, Mrs. Thatcher, I'll be honest with you. This is going to be difficult. Gideon has resources and he's motivated, but you have something important on your side. What's that? Eliza asked. The truth. It may not always be enough, but it's where we start. The ride home was quieter than the trip out. The girls seemed subdued, processing everything they learned about the legal battle ahead. Eliza watched the landscape pass and tried not to think about what would happen if they lost. Cole drove with his usual steady competence, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. On the second night, after the girls had fallen asleep, Eliza found Cole standing watch by the fire. She sat down beside him. You didn't have to do this, she said quietly. Any of it. You could have sent us away that first day and none of this would be your problem. Yes, it would. He poked at the fire with a stick. Even if you'd left, Gideon would have found you eventually, and then I'd have spent the rest of my life wondering if I could have prevented whatever he did to those girls. That's not your burden to carry. Maybe not, but I'm carrying it anyway. He looked at her. You asked Morrison if there was anything questionable in my past. There is, but not the way he meant. Eliza waited. After Sarah and the baby died, I stopped caring whether I lived or not. Took stupid risks working with the cattle, drank too much, picked a fight in town with a man twice my size just to feel something other than empty. He stared into the flames. Doc Patterson, the one who tried to save Sarah, he's the one who finally knocked sense into me. Told me if I wanted to die, I should at least have the decency to make it quick instead of wasting his time patching me up every few weeks. That's not questionable behavior. That's grief. It's weakness, the kind that makes men unfit to protect anyone else. He turned to face her fully. I'm telling you this because if Gideon's investigator digs deep enough, he'll find people who'll say Cole Thatcher was half crazy after his wife died, that I wasn't stable, and that might be enough to convince a judge I'm not fit to adopt your daughters. Or it might convince a judge you're someone who survived terrible loss and came out stronger. Eliza held his gaze. You're not that man anymore, Cole. Anyone who's seen you these past weeks knows that. Do they? Or am I just better at hiding it? You're better at living with it. There's a difference. She hesitated, then reached out and took his hand. Whatever happens in court, whatever Gideon throws at us, we face it together.
That's what this marriage means, even if it started as something practical. Cole looked down at their joined hands. When I gave you Sarah's ring, I thought I was being practical, efficient. But the truth is, I couldn't stand the thought of it sitting in a drawer while another woman needed protection I could provide. He pulled something from his pocket, a simple gold band, new and unadorned. This is yours. Not Sarah's. Yours. He slid it onto her finger, replacing the ghost of the first ring with something present and real. Cole, don't read too much into it. It's still practical, but it's also honest. He stood, releasing her hand. Get some sleep. We've got another long day tomorrow. He walked away before she could respond, disappearing into the darkness beyond the firelight. Eliza sat alone, turning the new ring on her finger, feeling the weight of what it represented. Not love. Cole had been clear about that. But commitment, partnership, the kind of bond that meant when trouble came, and it was coming, they'd face it as a unit rather than as strangers bound by legal necessity. It wasn't what she'd imagined when she'd written that first desperate letter, but it was something worth fighting for, and fight they would. Because Gideon Wren had underestimated what he was up against. He thought he was facing a desperate widow and her frightened children. He didn't know about the hard Wyoming rancher who'd decided those children were under his protection, or about the woman who'd crossed half a continent to keep them safe, or about the family they were slowly, painfully becoming, not through blood or sentiment, but through choice and stubborn refusal to let anything break what they'd built. The fire crackled and settled. Eliza pulled her blanket tighter against the night chill and watched the stars wheel overhead. Somewhere to the east, Gideon was preparing his case, gathering his lies, sharpening his weapons. Let him come. They'd be ready. The hearing was set for the first week of September in the territorial courthouse in Cheyenne. Morrison sent word by courier, along with a thick packet of documents that needed reviewing. Eliza read through depositions from neighbors in St. Louis who claimed she'd been erratic, unreliable, overly protective to the point of paranoia. They painted a picture of a woman unraveling after her husband's death, making irrational decisions, dragging her children into danger rather than accepting help from concerned family. The lies were careful and convincing. Gideon had done his work well, but Morrison had done his work too. He'd located Mrs. Patterson, the school teacher, who'd provided a sworn statement that Maisie and Clara had been well-fed, well-dressed, and eager students, that Eliza had been involved in their education despite working long hours, that there had been no signs of neglect or instability, only a mother doing her best under difficult circumstances. He'd also gathered testimony from Doc Harris in Millerville, who'd examined Clara after their arrival and confirmed she'd been suffering from heat exhaustion and dehydration, but was otherwise healthy and well cared for. And from the land office clerk who'd witnessed their marriage, stating that both parties had seemed clear-headed and willing. It wasn't much against Gideon's carefully constructed narrative, but it was something. The week before the hearing, Cole sat down with Maisie at the kitchen table. Eliza was putting Clara to bed, so it was just the two of them in the lamplight. I need to ask you something, Cole said, and I need you to answer honestly, even if the answer is no. Maisie looked wary. All right. Morrison thinks your testimony could make a difference. You're old enough that the judge would take what you say seriously, but it would mean standing up in court and talking about what happened in St. Louis, about Gideon. He paused. About why your mother felt she had to run. Maisie's face went very still. What would I have to say? The truth. What he did. How he made you feel. Why you were afraid. Cole's voice was gentle but firm. It won't be easy. Gideon's lawyer will try to make you doubt yourself, suggest you're exaggerating, or were influenced by your mother. You'd have to be strong enough to stand by what you know happened. And if I can't, if I get scared and can't talk, then we don't put you through it. We find another way. He met her eyes. But Maisie, I want you to understand there might not be another way. This case comes down to credibility. Gideon says your mother overreacted to innocent concern. He put his hand on my hair and said I had my mother's coloring, but the way he did it, the way his fingers moved, she pulled away, wrapping her arms around herself. Mama saw. That was the night she started planning to leave. Cole's jaw tightened. If you testified to that, if you told the judge exactly what you just told me, it would be powerful. It would show Gideon's concern wasn't innocent at all.
But Mama doesn't want me to testify. She said she won't put me through it. Your mother wants to protect you, but sometimes being protected means being powerless. He leaned forward. I'm not going to make this decision for you, Maisie. Neither is your mother. This is your choice. If you can stand up there and tell your story, we'll support you. If you can't, we'll respect that too. But you need to know that your voice matters, that what you have to say could change everything. Maisie stared at her hands for a long moment. I'm scared. That's smart. This is scary. But I'm also angry. She looked up and there was fire in her eyes. He made us run. He made Mama lie and scrape and beg just to keep us safe. He tried to take everything from us, and now he's trying to finish it. And I hate him for it. Hate's useful, Cole said quietly. If you can turn it into something strong enough to stand on. Will you be there? In the courtroom? Every minute. And Mama? Right beside you. Maisie drew a shaky breath. Then I'll do it. I'll testify. When Eliza emerged from settling Clara and learned what had transpired, she turned on Cole with fury in her eyes. You had no right to ask her that without talking to me first. She has a right to make her own choice. She's 12 years old. She shouldn't have to make choices like this. She's 12 years old and she's already had to make a dozen impossible choices to survive. This one, at least, she gets to make with support. Cole's voice was calm but unyielding. I know you want to shield her. But Eliza, if we lose this case, you won't be able to shield her from anything. Gideon will have legal custody, and everything you've done to protect your daughters will have been for nothing. Don't you dare suggest I'm not protecting them. I'm suggesting that sometimes protection looks like letting them be brave instead of keeping them safe. He stood. Maisie is stronger than you think. Trust her. Eliza wanted to argue, to rage against the unfairness of a world that demanded a child defend herself against an adult's predation. But she also knew Cole was right. If Maisie could testify, if she could tell the truth clearly and powerfully, it might be enough to tip the balance. She just hated that it had come to this. They traveled to Cheyenne 2 days before the hearing, taking rooms at the same hotel. Morrison met with them each evening, preparing Maisie for what to expect. He was gentle but thorough, asking the questions Gideon's lawyer would ask, teaching her how to answer clearly without getting defensive or emotional. When he asks if your mother told you what to say, what do you answer? Morrison prompted. She told me to tell the truth, Maisie recited, nothing more. And when he suggests your uncle was just being affectionate, that you misunderstood his intentions? I know the difference between affection and something wrong. I'm 12, not stupid. Morrison smiled slightly. Good. Keep that edge. It shows you're sharp, not manipulated. He turned to Eliza. You'll testify first, then Cole, then Maisie. I want the judge to see the progression. Your perspective as a mother, Cole's perspective as a protective stepfather, and finally Maisie's first-hand account. By the time she speaks, the foundation will be laid. What about Gideon? Cole asked. Will he testify? Almost certainly. He'll present himself as the concerned uncle trying to rescue his nieces from an unstable situation. We'll have a chance to cross-examine, and that's where we'll break his credibility. Morrison's eyes were sharp. I'll need you both to stay calm no matter what he says. If he claims you're unfit, Eliza, don't react. If he suggests Cole is after your money or using the girls, I don't have any money, Eliza said. He'll invent some motive. The point is, we can't give him ammunition by looking defensive or angry. We present facts, stay composed, and let him hang himself with his own inconsistencies. The night before the hearing, Eliza couldn't sleep. She stood at the hotel window, looking out at the darkened streets of Cheyenne, and felt the weight of everything pressing down. Tomorrow would determine whether her daughters stayed with her or were handed over to a man who'd terrorized them. Whether the life they'd built on Cole's ranch would continue or shatter. A soft knock at the connecting door made her turn. Cole stood there, fully dressed despite the late hour. Can't sleep either? He asked. No. He came in, careful to leave the door open for propriety. I've been thinking about what happens if we lose. Eliza's throat tightened. Don't. We have to consider it. If the judge rules for Gideon, then I take the girls and we disappear. Canada, maybe. Somewhere he can't follow. That would make you a fugitive. You'd be running for the rest of your life. I've already been running. At least this way they'd be safe.
Cole was quiet for a moment. There's another option. What? We don't accept the ruling. We appeal, keep fighting, use every legal avenue Morrison can find. Could take years, but years of living in limbo? Years of Gideon hanging over us, threatening to take them at any moment? Eliza shook her head. I can't do that to them, Cole. They need stability, not constant fear. Then we make sure we win tomorrow. He stepped closer. Eliza, I need you to know something. If it comes down to it, if the judge asks why I want to adopt your daughters when I barely know them, I'm going to tell him the truth. The truth? That I lost my own child 3 years ago. That I thought I was done with family. That I'd never let myself care about anyone again because the pain was too much.
But that your daughters are here, in my home, and whether I planned it or not, they've become part of my life. That watching Maisie learn to trap, seeing Clara get braver every day, it's reminded me what it feels like to have something worth protecting. His voice roughened, and that maybe I'm not adopting them just to give them my name. Maybe I'm doing it because I need them as much as they need me. Eliza's eyes stung. Cole, I'm not saying I love them. I don't know if I'm capable of that anymore. But I'm saying they matter, and I'll fight for them like they're my own blood, because in every way that counts, they are. She closed the distance between them and did something she'd never done before. She embraced him, wrapping her arms around his solid frame and pressing her face against his shoulder. For a moment he stood frozen, uncertain. Then slowly his arms came around her. They stood like that in the dim hotel room, two wounded people holding each other up before a battle that could destroy everything they'd tried to build. Thank you, Eliza whispered, for all of it, for taking us in, for marrying me, for fighting when you didn't have to. I had to, Cole said quietly. I just didn't know it until you showed up on my doorstep with your daughters and your secrets and nowhere else to go. They separated before the embrace could become something more complicated. Cole returned to his own room, and Eliza finally managed a few hours of restless sleep. The courthouse was imposing, 2 stories of brick and timber with a territorial seal above the entrance. Inside, the hearing room was smaller than Eliza had imagined. Just a raised bench for the judge, a witness box, and rows of wooden seats. Morrison was already there, organizing papers with methodical precision. And there, across the aisle, was Gideon Wren. He looked exactly as Eliza remembered, well-dressed, well-groomed, with the kind of face that invited trust. Distinguished graying at the temples, a strong jaw, eyes that could project concern or authority depending on what served him. He nodded to her as if they were old friends meeting under unfortunate circumstances. Eliza's skin crawled. Beside Gideon sat his lawyer, a sharp-featured man named Caldwell, who had the look of someone who enjoyed crushing opposition. He was reviewing documents with an expression of smug confidence that made Eliza's stomach turn. The judge entered, a gray-haired man named Harrison with a stern face and measuring eyes. Everyone stood as he took his seat. This is a hearing to determine custody of minors. Maisie Wren, age 12, and Clara Wren, age 8, currently residing with their mother, Eliza Thatcher, and her husband, Cole Thatcher, in Wyoming Territory. Petitioner Gideon Wren seeks custody on grounds that the mother is unfit and that as their blood relation, he has superior rights and interest in the children's welfare. Mrs. Thatcher contests this claim. Mr. Morrison, you may begin. Morrison stood. Your Honor, this case is fundamentally about a mother's right to protect her children from a man who posed an ongoing threat to their safety and well-being. The evidence will show that Eliza Thatcher made reasonable and responsible decisions in removing her daughters from a dangerous situation, that she has provided them with a stable home in Wyoming, and that Gideon Wren's petition is motivated not by genuine concern, but by a desire for control. He was denied when Mrs. Thatcher escaped his influence. That's a serious allegation, Mr. Morrison, Judge Harrison said. I hope you have evidence to support it. We do, Your Honor. I call Eliza Thatcher to the stand. Eliza walked to the witness box on trembling legs, placed her hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. Morrison's questions were straightforward. Her marriage to Thomas, his death, the financial hardship that followed, Gideon's initial helpfulness that gradually became controlling. And when did you begin to fear for your daughter's safety? Morrison asked. When Gideon started paying too much attention to Maisie, making comments about her appearance, about how she was growing up, standing too close, touching her hair. Eliza kept her voice steady. And then one night he came to our rooms late, clearly intoxicated, and tried the door handle. I'd locked it, thank heavens. But he stood there for nearly 2 hours, and I could hear him breathing on the other side, muttering about family obligations and how I needed to be reasonable. What did you do? I began planning our departure. I couldn't go to the authorities. Gideon was well connected, respected. Who would believe me over him when all he'd done was be helpful? But I knew if we stayed, something terrible would happen. So I answered an advertisement for a marriage arrangement in Wyoming territory. And you disclosed your children in that correspondence? No. Eliza met the judge's eyes. I lied. I was desperate and frightened, and I knew most men wouldn't take a widow with 2 children, so I claimed to be alone. It was wrong, but it was the only way I could see to get my daughters to safety. Caldwell's cross-examination was brutal. He hammered at the lie, suggested she'd manipulated Cole Thatcher, questioned whether her fear of Gideon was real or imagined. He brought up the depositions from St. Louis neighbors claiming she'd been unstable. These people say you were paranoid after your husband's death, Mrs. Thatcher, that you saw threats where none existed. Isn't it possible you misinterpreted my client's innocent concern as something sinister? No, Eliza said firmly. I know the difference between concern and threat. Do you? Because it seems you fled across the country, lied to a stranger, and married him within weeks, all because a family member tried to help you. Does that sound like rational behavior to you? It sounds like a mother protecting her children the only way she could. Or like a woman too emotionally compromised to make sound judgments. Caldwell smiled coldly. No further questions. Cole testified next, describing how Eliza and the girls had arrived, his initial anger at the deception, his decision to let them stay. Morrison walked him through the improvements they'd made to the ranch, the way the household had stabilized, his growing conviction that the arrangement was beneficial for everyone. And why do you want to adopt these children, Mr. Thatcher? Morrison asked. Cole looked directly at the judge. Because they're good children who deserve a safe home. Because their mother is my wife, which makes them my responsibility. And because I lost my own daughter 3 years ago, and I thought that meant I was done with family. But these girls, they've reminded me that sometimes family finds you whether you're looking for it or not. And that's worth protecting. The courtroom was silent for a moment. Even Caldwell seemed momentarily off balance, but he recovered quickly in cross-examination. Very touching, Mr. Thatcher. But isn't it true you initially ordered Mrs. Wren and her daughters to leave your property? Yes. And that you only allowed them to stay because the younger child was ill? That's correct. So this great family feeling you describe, it came after you'd already decided they were too much trouble? It came after I got to know them, Cole said evenly. After I saw what they were capable of and what they'd endured. People change their minds when presented with new information. That's called learning, not inconsistency. Caldwell's expression soured, but he pressed on. You've been married less than 3 months. That's awfully quick to decide you want to be a father to children you didn't even know existed 4 months ago. 3 months of working alongside someone every day tells you more than 3 years of occasional visits, Cole said. I know these girls. I know they're hardworking, intelligent, and deserving of protection. That's enough for me. Or perhaps you simply want to keep your household arrangement intact, regardless of what's actually best for the children. What's best for the children is to be with their mother and away from a man who terrorized them. Cole's voice went hard. I've seen what fear looks like. I've seen how Clara flinches at sudden movements and how Maisie watches every door like she's expecting someone to break through. That's not normal childhood caution. That's trauma. And the source of that trauma is sitting right over there. Your Honor, Caldwell objected, the witness is making unfounded accusations. Sustained. Mr. Thatcher, confine yourself to facts. But Judge Harrison was looking at Cole with increased attention. When it was finally Maisie's turn, Eliza wanted to call it off, to spare her daughter this ordeal. But Maisie walked to the witness box with her head high, took the oath, and sat down with her hands folded in her lap. Morrison was gentle with her, establishing the basic facts of their life in St. Louis, their father's death, the difficult year that followed. Then he moved to the crucial question. Maisie, did your Uncle Gideon ever make you uncomfortable? Yes. Her voice was clear and steady. Can you describe how? He would watch me.
When he thought Mama wasn't looking, he'd stare at me in a way that made me feel wrong inside.
And he'd make comments about how I was growing up, how I was getting pretty, how boys would start noticing me soon. But the way he said it, it wasn't like an uncle should talk. It was like, she paused, searching for words. Like he was thinking things he shouldn't think. Did he ever touch you inappropriately? Once he put his hand in my hair. He said I had Mama's coloring, but his fingers, they moved through my hair too slowly, too deliberately, like he was savoring it.
Maisie's voice shook slightly but didn't break. Mama saw, and that night I heard her crying in the other room, and I knew we were going to leave soon. Why didn't you tell anyone else what was happening? A teacher? A neighbor? Who would believe me? He was Uncle Gideon, the kind man helping his poor widowed sister-in-law. I was just a child with an overactive imagination. That's what people would have said. She looked directly at Gideon.
That's what you were counting on, wasn't it? That we'd be too scared to speak up, and if we did, no one would believe us.
Your Honor, Caldwell was on his feet. This is highly prejudicial. The witness is answering the question asked, Morrison said calmly. Overruled, Judge Harrison said. Continue. Caldwell's cross-examination was vicious. He suggested Maisie had been coached, that she was repeating things her mother had told her to say, that she was too young to accurately interpret adult behavior. Isn't it possible, Maisie, that your uncle's affection was innocent and you simply misunderstood it? No? How can you be so sure? You were 11 years old. How much did you really know about how adults should behave? I knew enough to know when something felt wrong. Maisie's voice was sharp,
and I knew that when he stood outside our door that night, breathing and waiting, he wasn't there to check if we were okay. He was there because he thought eventually Mama would open the door, and if she had, something bad would have happened. You don't know that. Yes, I do. The same way you know when a dog is friendly or when it's about to bite. You just know. She leaned forward. Uncle Gideon wants you to think Mama is crazy, that she imagined everything, but she didn't. She saw what was happening and she protected us. That's what good mothers do. Caldwell tried several more times to shake her testimony, but Maisie held firm. When she finally stepped down, Eliza saw tears tracking down her daughter's face, but her expression was one of fierce pride. She'd been brave. She'd been strong. She'd told her truth. Now it was Gideon's turn. He took the stand with the air of a wronged man seeking justice. Under Caldwell's questioning, he painted a picture of deep concern for his late brother's children, of a widow who'd become increasingly paranoid and erratic, of his attempts to help being rebuffed and misinterpreted. I was only trying to ensure the girls had male guidance, he said, his voice heavy with false sincerity. Their father was gone. They needed a strong presence in their lives. If my attention made them uncomfortable, I certainly never intended that. I was simply trying to be a good uncle. And when Mrs. Wren left without warning, taking the children across the country, how did that make you feel? Terrified for their safety. She had no money, no plan, no idea what she was getting into. I feared she'd get them killed through her recklessness. He looked at the judge. All I want is to bring my nieces home, to give them the stable, secure upbringing their father would have wanted for them. Morrison's cross-examination cut through the performance like a blade. Mr. Wren, you testified you were concerned for the children's welfare. Yet you didn't try to contact Mrs. Wren for 6 weeks after she left. Why? Gideon's smile faltered. I was trying to locate her. You're a successful businessman with resources. It would have been simple to hire an investigator immediately. Why did you wait? I hoped she'd come to her senses and return on her own. Or perhaps you weren't actually concerned until you realized she'd successfully escaped your control. Morrison's voice was sharp. Isn't it true that you only filed for custody when you learned she'd married and established a stable home in Wyoming? When it became clear she wasn't coming back? I don't know what you're implying. I'm implying that this petition has nothing to do with the children's welfare and everything to do with your desire to reassert authority over a woman who defied you. Morrison pulled out a document. I have a statement here from a former housemate of yours, Mr. Wren. She claims you dismissed her after she refused your unwanted advances. Would you like to address that? Caldwell shot to his feet. Your Honor, this is irrelevant character assassination. It goes to pattern of behavior, Morrison countered. If Mr. Wren has a history of inappropriate conduct toward women, it directly impacts his suitability as guardian. I'll allow it, Judge Harrison said. Mr. Wren, please answer the question. Gideon's composure cracked. That woman was a liar who tried to extort money from me. I dismissed her for theft. Yet you never pressed charges. Strange, if she was truly a thief. Morrison moved closer. Isn't the truth that you have a pattern of taking advantage of women in vulnerable positions? That you saw your brother's death as an opportunity to gain control over his widow and daughters? And that when Mrs. Wren refused to submit to that control, you decided to use legal means to force compliance? That's absurd, is it? Then explain why, in your petition, you make no mention of your niece's wishes, no concern for their emotional well-being, no acknowledgement that they might be happy in their current home. It's all about your rights, your concerns, your desire to have them under your authority. Morrison's voice cut like ice. This isn't about saving children, Mr. Wren. It's about winning a battle of wills with a woman who dared to say no to you. By the time Morrison finished, Gideon's mask had slipped entirely. He looked angry, cornered, nothing like the concerned uncle he'd tried to portray. Judge Harrison watched him with narrow, assessing eyes. Closing arguments were swift. Caldwell tried to recover, emphasizing blood ties and suggesting that despite Cole and Eliza's good intentions, the girls belonged with family. Morrison countered that family was defined by care and protection, not biology, and that Gideon had demonstrated neither. Then they waited while Judge Harrison reviewed his notes. The silence in the courtroom was suffocating. Eliza reached for Cole's hand under the table, and he gripped it tight. Across the aisle, Gideon sat rigid, his lawyer whispering urgently in his ear. Finally, Judge Harrison looked up. I've heard testimony from both sides regarding the welfare and proper custody of Maisie and Clara Wren. This is not a simple case. There are legitimate questions about Mrs. Thatcher's initial deception and the speed with which this family unit was formed. However, there are equally serious questions about Mr. Wren's motivations and conduct. He paused, and Eliza's heart hammered so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. Thatcher's contemporaneous actions to remove the children from Mr. Wren's proximity suggests a pattern of concerning conduct that cannot be dismissed as mere misunderstanding. Gideon's face went white. Furthermore, the judge continued, I note that in the 4 months since Mrs. Thatcher's marriage to Mr. Cole Thatcher, the children have thrived. Medical testimony confirms they are healthy. Educational records show continued learning. And most importantly, both children have expressed a clear preference to remain with their mother and stepfather. While blood relation carries weight in custody matters, it is not absolute. The best interest of the child is paramount, and in this case, that interest is clearly served by remaining in the care of a mother who has demonstrated appropriate protective instincts and a stepfather willing to provide legal and financial stability. Judge Harrison looked directly at Gideon. Mr. Wren, your petition for custody is denied. Furthermore, I am granting Mr. Thatcher's petition for adoption of both minor children. Effective immediately, Maisie and Clara will legally become Maisie Thatcher and Clara Thatcher, with all rights and privileges pertaining thereto. The gavel came down with a crack that sounded like thunder. Eliza couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but grip Cole's hand and try to process what she'd just heard. They'd won. The girls were safe, legally, permanently, irrevocably safe. Across the aisle, Gideon stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. His face was twisted with rage, all pretense of concern abandoned. This is not over, he said, his voice low and venomous. I will appeal. I will fight this. You will do nothing of the sort. Judge Harrison's voice cracked like a whip. Mr. Wren, you will accept this ruling and cease all contact with these children. If I hear of any further harassment, any attempts to interfere with this family, I will hold you in contempt, and you will face criminal charges for threatening the welfare of minors. Do I make myself clear? Gideon's jaw worked, but he managed a curt nod. Then this hearing is concluded. The gavel fell again, final and absolute. Morrison was grinning, shaking Cole's hand and congratulating them both. Eliza turned to find Maisie and Clara standing behind her, both girls looking stunned and hopeful. Mama? Clara's voice was small. Does this mean we can stay? Yes, baby, we can stay. Forever. Clara burst into tears. Maisie tried to hold it together, but when Cole put his hand on her shoulder and said, You did good up there. Real good. She dissolved too, pressing her face against Eliza's side and crying like the child she still was. They left the courthouse as a family, legally recognized, officially bound, no longer a practical arrangement, but something real and permanent. Gideon watched them go with hatred burning in his eyes, but he was powerless now. The law had spoken, and it had chosen them. That night, in their hotel rooms, they celebrated quietly. Morrison joined them for dinner, accepting their gratitude with the gruff pragmatism of a man who'd simply done his job well. When he left, Cole ordered dessert for the girls, and they ate pie and laughed with the giddy relief of people who'd survived something terrible. Later, after the girls had finally fallen asleep in their shared room, Cole found Eliza on the balcony overlooking Cheyenne's main street. "Can't believe it's real?" he asked. "Not quite." She looked at him. "Thank you. For everything you did in there, for claiming them, for fighting." "They're my daughters now," Cole said simply. "Legally and in every other way that matters. That means I protect them, always. Even though you didn't want this? Any of this?" He was quiet for a moment, staring out at the darkened street. "I didn't want to risk caring again. I didn't want to open myself up to the possibility of loss. But Eliza, what I wanted and what I needed turned out to be different things." He turned to face her. "I needed a reason to be more than just a man going through the motions. I needed to remember what it felt like to have something worth fighting for. Your daughters, our daughters, gave me that." "And me?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Cole reached out and cupped her face gently. "You gave me back my life, even if it looked like chaos and complications when you first arrived." His thumb brushed her cheek. "This started as a practical arrangement, but somewhere along the way it became something I can't imagine living without." He kissed her then, soft and careful and full of promise. It wasn't passion, not yet, but it was the beginning of something deeper than strategy or survival. It was the first real step toward becoming the family they'd pretended to be. When they separated, Eliza rested her forehead against his. "I didn't come here looking for love, Cole. I came here looking for safety." "And I offered you a marriage in name only," he replied, "but we're both stubborn enough to have changed our minds." They stood together in the Wyoming night, two people who'd started as strangers and become something more through hardship and choice. Behind them, their daughters slept peacefully, no longer haunted by the shadow of Gideon Wren. Ahead of them stretched a future that was uncertain, but theirs to build. The woman who'd arrived at a remote ranch with two daughters and a lie had claimed more than shelter. She'd claimed a home, a partner, and a life no one could take from her. And the man who'd thought he was done with family had found one anyway, built not from blood, but from the fierce determination to protect what mattered. They rode back to the ranch 3 days later, the adoption papers safely filed, the threat finally ended. As they crested the rise that looked down into their valley, Eliza saw the cabin with new eyes. It wasn't just shelter anymore. It was home. Clara saw it too. "Papa," she said, the word coming naturally now. "Can we have a garden? A bigger one?" Cole looked back at her, and his expression was soft in a way it never used to be. "We can have whatever you want, sweetheart. This is your home now." Maisie met Eliza's eyes and smiled, a real smile, unguarded and full of hope. They'd survived, they'd fought, they'd won, and in the process, they'd become exactly what Cole's advertisement had promised and what Eliza had desperately needed, a family built on honesty, hard work, and the stubborn refusal to let anything break what they'd chosen to build together. The Wyoming sun was setting as they reached the ranch, painting everything gold and red. Cole helped the girls down from the wagon, then turned to Eliza and offered his hand. She took it, stepping down into the life they'd made, the one that had started with deception and desperation but had become something true and worth keeping. Home. Finally, impossibly, home. Part 5. Lưu Trầm. Viết 6.000 đến 6.500 từ liên kết liên mạch với các phần trước trong câu chuyện, phá hối thoại tạo thành một câu chuyện liền mạch khi ghép lại. Mỗi phần liền mạch với phần trước không giới thiệu lại câu chuyện ở đầu phần mới. Liên kết các phần của câu chuyện một cách liền mạch. Số cú, sử dụng câu chuyện tiếp giữa các phần. Duy trì chủ đề, tránh ngắt quãng đột ngột, không sử dụng gạch đầu dòng hoặc tiêu đề phụ. Phong cách kể chuyện Mỹ, Hoa Kỳ, giống văn giàu cảm xúc. Kể theo ngôi thứ ba, giữ đồ kịch tính không viết lan man.
Phần 5 giải quyết hết vấn đề và kết thúc trọn vẹn câu chuyện. Câu chuyện không nhắc đến Chúa. Lưu ý trả lời trong mục tin nhắn không nhảy sang document, chỉ dẫn bắt buộc, không được xuất hiện trong nội dung chuyên. Đây là một câu chuyện điện ảnh hoàn toàn hư cấu được tạo ra chỉ nhằm mục đích giải trí. Không đề cập hay ngụ ý rằng nó dựa trên sự kiện có thật, người thật hoặc câu chuyện có thật. Không sử dụng các cụm từ như dựa trên một câu chuyện có thật, theo ghi chép hoặc bất cứ điều gì tương tự. Tất cả các nhân vật, địa điểm, tổ chức và sự kiện phải hoàn toàn hư cấu.
Show more to 1034 about Thomas. Part 5. The first snow came early that year, dusting the valley in white 2 weeks after they returned from Cheyenne. Eliza woke to find Cole already gone from their bed, the bed they'd been sharing for a month now. Though the transition from separate rooms to shared space had happened so gradually, neither could pinpoint exactly when it became permanent. She found him in the barn, feeding the horses in the pre-dawn darkness.
He looked up when she approached, and the smile that crossed his face was still new enough to make her heart skip.
Couldn't sleep? She asked.
Wanted to get an early start. There's fence work that needs finishing before the heavy snows come.
He hung the feed bucket and pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her in a gesture that had also become habit. But I'm glad you're here. The girls were asking last night if we could start planning for Christmas. Clara wants to make decorations, and Maisie thinks we should get a tree from the woods. Cole's expression shifted to something thoughtful. We never did much for Christmas after Sarah died. Seemed like too much effort for one person. We're not one person anymore. No. He kissed the top of her head. We're not. Tell them we'll get a tree next week, the biggest one we can fit in the house. Eliza pulled back to look at him.
Who are you, and what have you done with the grumpy rancher who told me marriage was just a practical arrangement?
He learned that practical arrangements can become something better if you're fool enough to let them.
His eyes were warm. I love you, Eliza. I should have said it before now, but I'm saying it now. I love you. And I love those girls. And I'm grateful every day that you lied to me in that letter. Eliza's throat tightened with emotion. I love you too.
Even when you're stubborn and difficult and insist on working in the freezing cold before the sun's up. Especially then, he said, and kissed her properly. They were still standing there, wrapped in each other, when Maisie's voice called from the barn door. Papa? Mama? Are you two going to stay out here all morning, or can we have breakfast? Cole groaned good-naturedly. We're coming. Tell your sister to set the table. She already did, and she made biscuits. They're a little burnt on the bottom, but she tried really hard. Then we'll eat them and tell her they're perfect, Eliza said, taking Cole's hand as they walked back toward the house. The morning routine had become comfortable over the months, Clara helping with breakfast while Maisie fed the chickens and collected eggs, Cole bringing in wood for the stove, Eliza organizing the day's tasks. They worked together like parts of a well-oiled machine, each person knowing their role and stepping in where needed. But comfort didn't mean there weren't still adjustments to make. That afternoon, while Cole was out checking on the cattle, a rider appeared on the road, a young man Eliza didn't recognize. He dismounted near the porch, holding an envelope. Mrs. Thatcher, I have a delivery from the land office in Cheyenne. Eliza's stomach clenched. Official correspondence still made her nervous, though she tried not to show it. Thank you. The rider tipped his hat and left. Eliza turned the envelope over in her hands, noting the seal. When she opened it, she found a formal notice that the adoption of Maisie and Clara Thatcher had been recorded in the territorial registry, along with updated birth records reflecting their new legal names and parentage. It was done. Completely, officially, permanently done. She was reading it a second time when Cole returned, stamping snow from his boots. What's that? Final adoption papers. It's all recorded now. They're legally yours in every way. Cole took the document, scanned it, then set it carefully on the table. Good. That's one less thing Gideon can try to challenge. Do you think he'll try again? No. Cole's voice was certain. Judge Harrison made it clear there would be consequences if he did. And Morrison sent word last week that Gideon's left St. Louis. Moved to Chicago, apparently. Starting over somewhere his reputation hasn't been damaged. So it's really over. It's really over. He pulled her close. We're safe. All of us. That evening, as they sat around the dinner table, Clara asked the question that had apparently been building in her mind for weeks. Papa, Can I call you Papa all the time now? Not just sometimes? Cole looked at her, and Eliza saw emotion flicker across his face. The same man who'd insisted he couldn't be a father to someone else's children, undone by an 8-year-old asking permission to love him. Clara, you can call me whatever feels right to you, but I'd be honored if you called me Papa. What about me? Maisie asked, trying to sound casual but clearly invested in the answer. I've been calling you Cole, but you'd like to call me Papa too? Maisie nodded. Then do it. You're my daughters, both of you. That's not just legal words on paper. That's real. He cleared his throat. And I'm proud to be your father. Maisie's eyes shone with tears she refused to let fall. Even though we came here by accident? Even though Mama lied and you didn't want us at first? Especially because of all that. Cole's voice was rough with feeling. Because it means we chose each other. Not because we had to, but because we wanted to. That makes us family in the truest sense. Clara got up from her chair and walked around the table to hug Cole. He wrapped his arms around her, and over her head he met Eliza's eyes. The look they shared spoke volumes about how far they'd come, how much they'd all changed, how this broken collection of people had become something whole. Maisie joined the embrace a moment later, and then Eliza, until they were all tangled together in the middle of the kitchen, holding each other like they could anchor themselves to this moment of perfect belonging. The weeks that followed were the happiest Eliza could remember. They fell into the rhythm of winter ranch work, feeding livestock, maintaining equipment, keeping the house warm against the bitter cold. The girls studied from books Cole had ordered from a catalog, their education continuing even without a formal school nearby. Maisie had a natural aptitude for mathematics that delighted Cole, while Clara loved reading and would narrate stories to anyone who'd listen. They got their Christmas tree on a crisp December morning, all 4 of them trudging into the woods to find the perfect specimen. Maisie insisted it had to be tall enough to brush the ceiling, while Clara wanted one with the most symmetrical branches. Cole settled the debate by cutting down a tree that satisfied both criteria, then dragging it back to the house while the girls danced around him like excited puppies. Decorating it became a family affair. They strung popcorn and cranberries, cut paper snowflakes, and hung small carved animals Cole had made in his workshop during the long evenings. Clara insisted on making a star for the top out of tin scraps, and though it was lopsided and rough, Cole lifted her up to place it with great ceremony. There, Clara said, surveying their work with satisfaction. Now it's perfect. Now it's home, Cole corrected gently, and Clara beamed at him. On Christmas morning, they woke to find small presents wrapped in brown paper under the tree. Cole had carved each girl a wooden horse, Maisie's standing proud and strong, Clara's in mid-gallop with its mane flowing. For Eliza, he'd made a beautiful jewelry box with her initials carved into the lid. Cole, this is too much, Eliza whispered, running her fingers over the smooth wood. It's not enough, he replied. But it's a start. Eliza had sewn new shirts for Cole and the girls, using fabric she'd carefully set aside from her household budget. The girls gave her drawings they'd made, Maisie's showing the ranch in remarkable detail, Clara's a family portrait with everyone holding hands. They spent the day together, cooking a special meal and telling stories by the fire. It was simple, warm, and exactly what a family should be. But the true test of what they'd become came in late January, when a blizzard swept through the valley with terrifying force. Cole had been checking the cattle in the far pasture when the storm hit. He should have been gone an hour, 2 at most. But when 3 hours passed with no sign of him, Eliza began to worry. When 4 hours passed and the snow was falling so thick she couldn't see the barn from the house, worry turned to fear. Mama, where is he? Clara's voice was small and frightened. He's probably taking shelter in one of the line shacks, Eliza said, trying to sound confident. He'll wait out the worst of the storm and come back when it's safe. But Maisie wasn't fooled. What if he's hurt? What if he's lying out there in the snow and can't get back? Then we go find him, Eliza said, making the decision even as the words left her mouth. Mama, no. Maisie grabbed her arm. You can't go out in this. You'll get lost. I know these lands now. I've walked them every day for months. I can find the path to the north pasture. She pulled on Cole's heavy coat, the one he'd left behind in his haste. You two stay here. Keep the fire going. If I'm not back by dark, you bundle up and go to the Hendersons' place. It's only 2 miles south. Can you do that? Mama, Maisie,
I need you to be strong, like you were in the wagon when Clara was sick. Can you do that for me? Maisie's jaw set with determination. Yes. Good girl. Eliza kissed both her daughters, then stepped out into the howling white. The cold hit like a physical blow. Wind tore at her coat and snow blinded her within steps. But Eliza pushed forward, keeping the fence line to her right as a guide. Cole had taught her that, always follow the fence, it'll lead you where you need to go. She walked for what felt like hours, but was probably less than one, fighting through drifts that sometimes came up to her thighs. The cold was brutal, seeping through layers of clothing and numbing her fingers and toes. But she kept moving because Cole was out here somewhere and she wouldn't lose him. Not after everything they'd survived. Not after finally finding something worth keeping. The line shack appeared out of the snow like a mirage. A small, rough structure used by ranch hands during summer cattle drives. Eliza stumbled toward it, praying Cole had made it this far. The door was partially blocked by a drift. She dug through it with frozen hands and finally got it open. Inside, hunched beside a small fire, was Cole. He looked up when she burst in, his face a mixture of relief and horror. "Eliza, what the hell are you doing out here?" "Looking for you." She slammed the door against the wind. "You didn't come back. I was afraid." "So you came out in a blizzard?" He stood, clearly torn between gratitude and fury. "You could have died. You could have gotten lost 10 feet from this shack and frozen to death before morning." "So could you." She crossed to him, her legs shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. "Don't you understand? I'm not losing you. Not to a storm, not to anything. We're a family, and families don't leave each other behind." Cole pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. "You terrify me sometimes. You know that?" "Good. You terrified me today, too. We're even." He laughed despite himself, then pulled back to check her for frostbite. Her fingers and toes were dangerously cold, and he immediately began rubbing warmth back into them while she sat by the fire. "We'll have to wait out the storm here," he said. "It's too dangerous to try to get back before it passes." "The girls are smart enough to follow the instructions you gave them. Maisie's got a good head on her shoulders. She'll take care of Clara." They huddled together by the fire, sharing body heat in the single blanket Cole had found in the shack. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, they held each other and waited. "I was scared today," Cole admitted quietly, "when the storm came up so fast. I thought about you and the girls back at the house, and all I could think was that I'd finally found something worth living for, and I might not make it back to tell you. You're telling me now." "I am." He tilted her face up to his. "I love you more than I thought I could love anything again. You and those girls, you're everything to me. And if something happens to me, I need you to know that these past months have been the happiest of my life." "Nothing's going to happen to you," Eliza said fiercely. "We're going to get through this storm, and we're going to go home, and we're going to keep building our life together. That's what we do. We survive." "We survive," he echoed, and kissed her. The storm blew itself out by morning. They made their way back to the house to find both girls safe and the home fires still burning. Maisie had kept everything running exactly as it should be, and Clara had managed her fear by baking bread. Lumpy, oddly shaped bread, but edible nonetheless. The reunion was tearful and joyful. The girls threw themselves at their parents, and for a long moment they all just held each other, grateful to be whole again. "Don't ever do that again," Maisie said, her voice muffled against Eliza's shoulder. "I can't promise that," Eliza said honestly, "but I can promise I'll always fight to come back to you." "Both of us will," Cole added, ruffling Maisie's hair. "You're stuck with us now." As winter gave way to spring, the ranch came alive again. Calves were born, the garden was planted, and the girls grew like weeds in the lengthening days. Maisie celebrated her 13th birthday with a new saddle Cole had commissioned from the leather worker in Millerville, while Clara turned 9 with a party that included all the neighboring families, the Hendersons, the Parkers, even the Johnsons from 10 miles east. The community had accepted them now, the whispers and speculation about their hasty marriage fading into acceptance of the family they'd become. Margaret Brennan still watched them with calculating eyes when they came to town, but her son Henry had finally dropped his challenge to the property line after Cole produced undeniable proof of legal ownership. The threat from that quarter had dissolved into mere unpleasantness rather than active hostility. In June,
Doc Harris came by to check on Clara, who'd been fighting a spring cold. While he was there, he examined Eliza too, a routine check that became something more when he asked careful questions about her symptoms. "Mrs. Thatcher," he said finally, "when was your last monthly course?" Eliza had to think about it. With everything that had happened, she hadn't been paying close attention. I'm not sure. Maybe 2 months ago? But that's happened before when I was under stress. I don't think it's stress this time." Doc Harris smiled. "I think you're expecting 2 months along? Maybe 3. The world tilted. Eliza sat down hard on the nearest chair. "That's not possible. I'm 33. I thought, after Clara, I assumed age makes it less likely, but not impossible." He packed his bag with the calm efficiency of a man who'd delivered this news countless times. "You'll want to take it easy as you get further along, and I'll want to check on you monthly. But barring complications, I'd say you'll have a new addition to the family come late fall." After he left, Eliza sat in the kitchen trying to process this development. A baby. She was going to have Cole's baby. After everything they'd been through, after building this family from broken pieces, they were going to add to it. The thought was terrifying and wonderful in equal measure. Cole found her there an hour later, still sitting in the same chair, staring at nothing. "Eliza, what did Doc Harris say? Is Clara all right?" "Clara's fine. It's just a cold." She looked up at him. "Cole, I'm pregnant." He went very still. "You're sure?" Doc Harris is sure. 2 or 3 months along. For a moment, Cole just stared at her. Then his face transformed with an emotion so powerful it took her breath away. Joy mixed with terror, mixed with something that looked like redemption. "A baby," he whispered. "We're going to have a baby." Are you happy about this?" Eliza asked, suddenly uncertain. "I know it's unexpected, and after what happened with Sarah..." He crossed to her and pulled her up into his arms. "I'm terrified. I'm remembering everything that went wrong before, and I'm scared out of my mind that history will repeat itself. But Eliza, I'm also happier than I have any right to be. Because this baby, it's proof that we're not just surviving anymore. We're living. We're building something new." Tears streamed down Eliza's face. "I'm scared too." "Then we'll be scared together. And we'll get through it together, the way we get through everything else." He pressed his forehead to hers. "You're not alone in this. You have me, you have the girls, you have Doc Harris who knows what he's doing. And we're going to do everything possible to make sure you and this baby are safe." They told the girls that evening. Maisie's face lit up with excitement. She was old enough to understand what a baby meant and immediately started planning all the ways she could help. Clara was more cautious, asking questions about whether the baby would take up all of Eliza's attention and whether there would still be room for her. "There will always be room for you," Eliza assured her, pulling her close. "You're my daughter. Nothing changes that. Not a new baby, not anything." "Will the baby call you Mama too?" Clara asked. "Probably. Is that all right?" Clara thought about it seriously. "Yes. Because we're all family now. The baby should get to be part of that too." As summer progressed, Eliza's pregnancy became more obvious. She tired more easily, and Cole insisted she take on less physical work, but she continued managing the household and keeping the ledgers. The girls adapted to helping more, taking on tasks without being asked, and showing a maturity that made Eliza proud. In August, a letter arrived from Daniel Morrison. Eliza opened it with trembling hands, fearing news about Gideon, but instead found something unexpected. Morrison had been contacted by the school teacher from St. Louis, Mrs. Patterson, who'd seen a notice in the newspaper about the custody case. She'd written to say that she'd always known Eliza was a good mother, and she was glad to hear things had worked out well. She also mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that Gideon Wren had been arrested in Chicago for fraud, something about a business scheme that had bilked investors out of substantial money. "He's facing criminal charges," Eliza read aloud to Cole. "Morrison says it's likely he'll be in prison for years." Cole set down the harness he'd been mending. "So he can't come after the girls. Even if he wanted to, he won't be in a position to do anything about it. It's really over." Eliza let the letter fall to her lap. "Everything he could have done to us, it's finished. Not because of anything we did," Cole pointed out, because he finally got caught being who he really was. But yes, it's over. You can stop looking over your shoulder now. It was a strange feeling, releasing fear she'd carried for so long. That night, Eliza slept more deeply than she had in 2 years, knowing that Gideon Wren was no longer a threat to anyone she loved. September brought the first hints of autumn and the final preparations for the baby's arrival. Cole built a cradle from wood he'd been saving, sanding it smooth and lining it with blankets Eliza had sewn. Maisie organized the small room off the main bedroom, creating a space for the infant. Clara collected soft things, rabbit fur, bits of fleece, anything that might comfort a newborn. They were ready when Eliza's labor began on a crisp October morning. Doc Harris arrived within hours of Cole's summons, bringing his assistant and his well-worn medical bag. He examined Eliza and declared everything was progressing normally, then settled in to wait. The labor was long, but not complicated. Cole stayed with her the entire time, holding her hand and offering encouragement, even when his own fear was written clearly on his face. The girls waited in the main room with Doc Harris's assistant, anxious and excited in turns. When the baby finally came, a robust, loud girl with a shock of dark hair, Cole wept openly. Doc Harris placed the infant in Eliza's arms, and she looked down at this tiny person they'd created and felt overwhelmed by love and gratitude. "She's perfect," Eliza whispered. "She is." Cole touched the baby's small hand with one finger, marveling. "What should we name her?" They'd discussed names but never settled on one. Now, looking at this child who represented everything they'd overcome and everything they'd built together, Eliza knew. "Hope," she said. "Her name is Hope." Cole's eyes shone. "Hope Thatcher. It's perfect." Doc Harris did his examination, declared both mother and baby healthy, and finally allowed the girls to come in. Maisie approached cautiously, as if the baby might break. Clara was bolder, immediately reaching out to touch Hope's tiny fingers. "She's so small," Maisie marveled. "You were this small once," Eliza told her. "Both of you were." "Can I hold her?" Clara asked. Eliza showed her how to support the baby's head, then carefully transferred Hope into her arms. Clara's face transformed with wonder and love. "Hi, baby Hope. I'm your big sister Clara, and this is your other big sister Maisie. And that's our papa, and that's our mama. You're going to love it here." "She's lucky to have you two as sisters," Cole said, his voice rough with emotion. They spent the evening together, passing the baby between them and marveling at this addition to their family. When Hope fussed, Maisie sang to her, a lullaby Eliza had sung years ago that Maisie still remembered. When she needed changing, Clara helped with careful, gentle hands, and when she needed feeding, Cole supported Eliza's back and shoulders, making sure she was comfortable. They worked together as they always had, but now there was something extra, a sense of completeness, of having arrived at something they'd been building toward all along. The weeks that followed were exhausting and beautiful. Hope was a good baby, but she was still a baby, which meant sleepless nights and constant attention. Eliza recovered slowly from the birth, her body tired but healing. Cole took on extra household tasks without complaint, and the girls stepped up in ways that showed how much they'd matured. One evening in late November, as the first real snow of the season fell outside, they gathered around the fireplace. Cole in his chair, Eliza nursing Hope on the sofa, Maisie reading aloud from a book while Clara listened with rapt attention. Cole looked around at his family and felt something settle in his chest, a peace he'd thought was gone forever after Sarah died. This was different from what he'd had before, built differently, formed from different materials, but it was just as real, just as valuable, just as worth protecting with everything he had. "Papa?" Clara looked up from the story. "Are you all right? You look sad." "Not sad," Cole said. "The opposite of sad. I'm just thinking about how lucky I am." "We're all lucky," Maisie said. "We could have ended up anywhere, but we ended up here." "Because Mama was brave enough to lie in a letter," Clara added, with the blunt honesty of a 9-year-old. Eliza laughed. "I'm never going to live that down, am I?" "No," Cole said, smiling. "But I'm grateful every day that you did. That lie brought you here. And everything that came after, everything good, everything hard, everything worth keeping, started because you were desperate enough to deceive a stranger. And because you were kind enough to let us stay anyway. Eliza countered. "Even when you didn't want to." "I wanted to," Cole said quietly. "I just didn't know it yet." They sat in comfortable silence after that, the fire crackling and the snow falling steadily outside. Inside, they were warm and safe and together, a family that had been forged through hardship and choice rather than blood and tradition. When spring came again, bringing new calves and green grass and longer days, they planted Clara's expanded garden together. Maisie worked with Cole on training a new horse, showing the patience and skill she'd learned over 2 years of ranch life. Hope learned to smile, then to laugh, then to grab at anything within reach with determined little hands. The ranch prospered. Cole's careful management, combined with Eliza's bookkeeping and the girls' hard work, had turned a struggling operation into something sustainable and profitable. They hired a ranch hand for the summer months, a quiet young man named Peter who worked hard and kept to himself, exactly the kind of help Cole preferred. In July, they received an invitation to the Hendersons' daughter's wedding. It would be their first major social event as a family, and Eliza fretted over what to wear, how to present themselves, whether they'd be truly accepted or merely tolerated. But when they arrived at the celebration, they were greeted warmly. The women cooed over Hope and complimented Eliza's dress. The men talked cattle and weather with Cole, accepting him as one of their own. The girls played with other children their age, Maisie showing off her roping skills, and Clara telling elaborate stories that held her audience captive. Margaret Brennan was there, of course. She approached Eliza with that familiar calculating expression, and Eliza braced for veiled hostility. But instead, Margaret surprised her. "Your daughters are lovely, Mrs. Thatcher, clearly well raised." "Thank you," Eliza said cautiously. "I was wrong about you," Margaret continued. "I thought you were taking advantage of Cole, using him to escape something. But I can see now that whatever brought you here, you've made a good life of it. And Cole, he's happier than I've seen him in years." It wasn't quite an apology, but it was acknowledgement. Eliza accepted it gracefully. "We've been fortunate. More than fortunate. Determined." Margaret's smile was genuine this time. "It takes courage to build something from nothing. You have that." After she walked away, Cole appeared at Eliza's side. "What did she want?" "To admit she was wrong about us." Eliza leaned against him. "I think we've finally been accepted." Took them long enough. But Cole was smiling. "Ready to dance?" "With you?" "Always." They moved onto the dance floor, joining other couples in the familiar patterns of a frontier celebration. Cole wasn't a graceful dancer, but he was steady and sure, and Eliza felt safe in his arms the way she always did. As they turned, she caught glimpses of their daughters, Maisie laughing with some older girls near the punch table, Clara showing hope to a group of admiring women, her family, hard-won, carefully built, absolutely precious. "What are you thinking?" Cole asked. "That I'd do it all again. Every hard moment, every scary decision, every time I thought we wouldn't make it, I'd do it all exactly the same if it meant ending up here with you. Even the part where you nearly died in a blizzard looking for me? Especially that part, because it showed you that I'm not going anywhere, that we're in this together, no matter what." Cole pulled her closer. "I love you, Eliza Thatcher, more than I thought I could love anyone after Sarah, more than I knew I was still capable of." "I love you too, and I'm grateful every day that you saw past my lies to what I was really asking for. A chance. Just one chance to prove we could be worth keeping. You were always worth keeping. I was just too stubborn to admit it right away." They danced until the music ended, then stood together watching their daughters and holding each other close. The Wyoming sky above them was vast and clear, full of stars that seemed close enough to touch. 2 years ago, Eliza had arrived at this valley with nothing but desperate hope and 2 frightened daughters. She'd lied her way into a stranger's life, gambling everything on a possibility that had seemed impossibly fragile. But that fragile possibility had grown into something strong and real. A marriage that had started as pure practicality had deepened into genuine love. A man who'd sworn he was done with family had become a devoted husband and father. Children who'd been running from danger had found safety and belonging. And a woman who'd thought she was just trying to survive had discovered she could do more than that. She could thrive. She could love. She could build a life worth living instead of just enduring. The ranch that had seemed like the end of the world when she'd first seen it was now the center of her world. The cabin that had felt like borrowed shelter was now truly home. The valley that had been empty and harsh was now full of life and love and possibility. As they walked back to collect their daughters and head home, Eliza looked at Cole, this man who'd given her everything when he'd thought he had nothing left to give, and felt her heart overflow with gratitude. They'd started with lies and desperation, but they'd built something true. And that truth was this: family wasn't just blood, or legal documents, or even shared history. Family was choice. It was showing up every day and choosing each other again and again, through hardship and joy, through fear and celebration, through every ordinary moment and every extraordinary one. Family was Maisie's fierce loyalty and Clara's gentle heart and Hope's innocent trust. It was Cole's steady strength and Eliza's stubborn determination. It was all of them together, choosing to be a family, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. And that choice, made every day, in 1,000 small ways, was the most powerful truth Eliza had ever known. The stars wheeled overhead as they drove home in the wagon, the girls drowsy in the back, the baby sleeping peacefully in Eliza's arms. Cole guided the horses with sure hands, and Eliza leaned against his shoulder, feeling the warmth of him through the fabric of his coat. Home. They were going home. To the ranch in the valley, to the life they'd built, to all the tomorrows waiting for them. And whatever those tomorrows brought, good or difficult, easy or challenging, they'd face it the way they'd faced everything else. Together. As a family. As people who'd been broken and had healed each other through the simple act of choosing to stay, to fight, to love. The Wyoming night was cold, but inside their small circle, husband and wife, daughters both born and chosen, baby sleeping peacefully, there was only warmth. And that warmth, that love, that fierce determination to protect what they'd built together was enough to light their way through any darkness that might come. They were home. They were family. They were exactly where they were meant to be. And that was everything.